The cathedral bells tolled like a death knell as Clara Whitmore stood at the altar in her borrowed wedding gown, staring into the coal-black eyes of the man who had purchased her. Baron Crowley's smile was a predator's grin, the same smile he'd worn, villagers whispered, when his three previous wives had walked through his manor doors and never walked out again. Her hands trembled as the priest opened his book. This wasn't a wedding, it was an execution dressed in white lace, and in 60 seconds she would belong to a monster. But what happened next would shatter everything she thought she knew about her fate. Stay until the end to see how a girl sold like livestock became the most powerful woman in the realm. Drop a like and comment your city below. Let's see where everyone's watching from. The morning Clara Whitmore learned she was to be sold began like any other morning in the village of Millbrook, cold, gray, and heavy with the weight of impossibility. She woke before dawn in the cramped room she shared with her younger sister Emma, whose labored breathing filled the darkness like a broken metronome. Consumption had been eating away at Emma's lungs for 2 years now, each cough a reminder of how little time they had left and how much money they didn't have. The medicine that might save her cost more than their family earned in a year. Clara dressed quickly in the pre-dawn chill, pulling on the same patched dress she'd worn for 3 years. The hem frayed and re-sewn so many times the original fabric was barely visible. Her fingers worked automatically, muscle memory guiding her through the morning routine while her mind calculated the impossible mathematics of their survival. Rent due in 6 days, 12 silver crowns. Emma's medicine, if they could afford it this month, 8 crowns. Food for the 4 of them, maybe 3 crowns if they stretched it thin. Total needed, 23 crowns. Her father's wages from the mill when he actually showed up for work instead of spending his time at the gambling dens, 7 crowns, maybe. The numbers never worked. They hadn't worked in years. Clara crept downstairs, careful to avoid the third step that creaked, and found her mother already awake in the kitchen, staring at the empty cupboards with the hollow-eyed expression of someone who had run out of hope months ago. "There's a bit of bread left," her mother said without turning around. "Give it to Emma." "You need to eat too, Mama." "I'm fine." The lie was automatic, worn smooth by repetition. Her mother had been fine through 2 decades of her father's failures, through the slow dissolution of everything they'd once had, through the gradual transformation of their lives from modest comfort to desperate poverty. She'd been fine as they'd sold her wedding ring, her mother's silver candlesticks, every small treasure that might bring a few coins. She'd been fine as their world contracted to this small, cold house and the constant grinding question of how to survive another day. Clara took the bread, hard and spotted with mold that she carefully cut away, and brought it upstairs with weak tea. Emma was awake, propped against thin pillows, her face pale against her dark hair. "You're up early," Emma said, managing a smile that couldn't hide the pain behind it. "Couldn't sleep." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, breaking the bread into small pieces. "Eat this." "You first." "Already had mine," Clara lied, just as automatically as their mother had. The lie was a gift, the only thing she had to give. Emma ate slowly, each swallow clearly painful, and Clara watched her sister's hands, still beautiful despite everything, long-fingered and graceful, and remembered when they'd been plump and healthy, when Emma had laughed without that terrible rattling cough, when the future had seemed like something other than a slow march toward tragedy. "Clara?" Emma's voice was soft, tentative. "What's going to happen to us?" "Don't worry about that. Just get better." "But the medicine." "I'm working on it." It was another lie, but what else could she say? That she'd been to every merchant in the village begging for credit? That she'd offered to work double shifts at the tavern for half wages? That she'd stood outside the physician's house in the rain yesterday, trying to find the courage to beg him to extend them more time before he demanded payment? The truth was a luxury they couldn't afford. Clara spent the morning at the tavern, where she worked 6 days a week, serving breakfast to the early risers and listening to the familiar sounds of village life, gossip about whose daughter was courting whom, complaints about the weather, speculation about whether Lord Pemberton would raise the rents again this year. Normal problems, manageable problems, the kind of problems people had when they weren't drowning. It was just past noon when her father found her. Marcus Whitmore stumbled through the tavern door with the particular unsteadiness that meant he'd been drinking since the previous night. The conversations around the room didn't stop. Nobody in Millbrook was surprised anymore to see Marcus drunk. But they did quiet, voices dropping to murmurs as everyone turned to watch the newest chapter in the Whitmore family's ongoing catastrophe. "Clara!" His voice was too loud, slurred at the edges. "Need to talk to you." Her employer, Mrs. Hadley, gave her a sympathetic look and a small nod. Clara untied her apron and followed her father outside, her stomach already knotting with dread. Nothing good ever followed those words. They walked to the edge of the village, to the old mill pond where the water ran dark and still. Her father wouldn't look at her, and that was worse than anything he might have said. "Papa, what did you do?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it, just a broken, desperate sound that made her want to shake him. "What did I do? What I always do, darling girl, made a mess of everything." "How much this time?" 200 crowns. The number hit her like a physical blow. 200 crowns. It might as well have been 2,000, 2 million. It was an impossible sum, more money than they could earn in 5 years, even if every penny went to the debt. "Who?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Started with Merchant Finch, then Lord Pemberton's gamekeeper, then—" He trailed off, finally meeting her eyes, and she saw the shame there, deep and corrosive. "Then Baron Crowley." Clara's blood went cold. Everyone in the valley knew about Baron Crowley. Everyone knew about his estate on the hill, about the high walls and locked gates, about the servants who wouldn't meet your eyes in the village market. Everyone knew about his wives. Elizabeth Crowley, dead in childbirth after 6 months of marriage, except there had been no child. Margaret Crowley, thrown from a horse in a tragic riding accident, except the stable boy had fled the estate that same night and never been seen again. Anne Crowley, taken by fever, except the physician had refused to sign the death certificate and left the region entirely. 3 dead wives in 7 years. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. "Tell me you didn't gamble with the Baron," Clara said, even though she already knew the answer. "He said it was a sure thing. He promised the cards were straight." "The Baron doesn't play straight cards, Papa. Everyone knows that. He lures men in and then destroys them." "Well, he's got me now, doesn't he?" Marcus's voice cracked. "He came to the house this morning, said if I don't pay by Sunday, he'll take everything. The house, my wages, everything. We'll be on the street, Clara. Emma won't last a week." Clara closed her eyes, trying to think through the panic. Sunday was 3 days away. 3 days to find 200 crowns or lose everything. The mathematics were even more impossible than usual. "I can talk to him," she said without much hope. "Maybe negotiate terms. If we pay a little each month—" "I tried that. He's not interested in terms." Her father's hands were shaking. "But he made an offer." Something in his voice made her open her eyes. He wasn't looking at her anymore, staring instead at the dark water of the mill pond as if he might find answers there. "What kind of offer?" "He'll forgive the entire debt, all of it. We keep the house, keep everything. Emma gets her medicine." Clara waited, her heart pounding, knowing what was coming and praying she was wrong. "All he wants is for you to marry him." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Clara heard them, understood them, but her mind refused to fully process their meaning. It was too absurd, too monstrous to be real. "You're not serious." "He said you caught his eye at the Harvest Festival last year, said you'd make a fine wife, a fine addition to his household." Addition. Not wife. Addition. Like a piece of furniture. A decorative object to be acquired and displayed. "I'm 22 years old, Papa. He's nearly 50. "I know." "His wives die." "I know." His voice broke completely now, and Clara realized he was crying. "I know what I'm asking. I know what he is. But Emma, Clara, think about Emma." And there it was. The trap that had no escape. Because she was thinking about Emma, about her little sister wasting away in that cold room, about the medicine they couldn't afford, about their mother's hollow eyes and empty cupboards. She was thinking about all of it, the way she'd been thinking about it every day for 2 years, the constant weight of impossible choices and losing battles. "There has to be another way," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew there wasn't. She'd exhausted every other way. They all had. If there was, don't you think I'd take it? Her father wiped his eyes roughly. You think I want this? You think I want to sell my own daughter to that monster? But he'd already made the choice. She could see it in his face, hear it in his voice. He'd weighed his daughter's life against his other daughter's life and his wife's survival, and he'd chosen the many over the one. It was a brutal calculation, but she couldn't even blame him for it. Wasn't she doing the same math in her own head right now? When does he need an answer? Tonight, he's coming to the house at sunset. That's in 5 hours. I know. Clara walked away from the pond without another word. She couldn't bear to look at her father anymore, couldn't stand the sight of what desperation had turned him into, what it had turned all of them into. She didn't go back to the tavern. She walked instead, following the old footpaths through the countryside, trying to find some alternative that didn't exist. Her mind kept circling back to the same impossible equations, the same lack of options. She thought about running away. But where would she go? She had no money, no skills that would earn her a living in the city, no connections or family beyond Millbrook. And even if she escaped, what would happen to Emma? To her mother? She thought about refusing, about forcing the Baron to take them to court over the debt. But the law was always on the side of men like Crowley. They'd lose the house, lose everything, and Emma would die anyway. She thought about appealing to the local lord, to the magistrate, to anyone with power. But she was a miller's daughter with no standing, no voice that anyone would hear. The powerful didn't listen to people like her. Every path led to the same destination. Every choice was just a variation on the same surrender. When Clara finally returned home as the sun was setting, she found her mother in the kitchen, her face streaked with tears. He told me, her mother said. Marcus told me everything. Clara sat down heavily at the table, suddenly exhausted. I don't know what to do, Mama. Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. You don't have to do this. We'll find another way. What other way? Tell me and I'll take it. We could leave. All of us. Go to the city, start over. With what money? Emma can barely walk to the end of the street, let alone travel. And the Baron would just find us. Men like him always do. Then I'll go to him. I'll offer myself instead. Mama, no. Clara squeezed her mother's hand. He doesn't want you. He wants young. He wants breakable, she didn't say. Controllable. Someone he could shape and terrorize and eventually destroy, just like he had the others. There has to be something, her mother insisted, but her voice had no conviction. They both knew the truth. Upstairs, Emma started coughing, the wet, rattling sound that meant she was getting worse. Clara and her mother locked eyes, and in that moment, the decision made itself. I'll do it, Clara said quietly. I'll marry him. Clara. For Emma. For all of us. She stood up, surprised to find her legs steady. Tell Papa to accept the Baron's offer. Baron Alistair Crowley arrived exactly at sunset, riding a black carriage drawn by matching black horses, everything calculated for maximum intimidation. He didn't come to the door like a normal suitor. He sent his footman to summon Clara's father outside, making Marcus come to him like a servant. Clara watched from the window as her father approached the carriage, watched as the Baron's pale hand extended through the window holding a rolled document, watched as her father signed away her life with a shaking hand. The Baron never even looked at the house, never asked to meet his bride-to-be, never performed any of the courtesies expected of a betrothal. He'd bought what he wanted, and that was the end of it. That night, Clara lay awake listening to Emma's labored breathing and trying to memorize the sound of her sister's voice, the feel of this small, safe room, the life she was about to leave behind. In 3 days, she would marry the Baron. In 3 days, everything she'd known would end. But Emma would have her medicine. Her family would keep their home. The debt would be paid. It was a trade, Clara told herself, a simple transaction, her life for theirs. She just hoped she'd last longer than the previous 3 wives. The next 2 days passed in a blur of grim preparations. The Baron sent a seamstress to the house with a wedding dress, already made, already sized, as if he'd known all along what her answer would be. The dress was beautiful in a cold, impersonal way, white silk and Belgian lace, the kind of gown Clara had dreamed about as a girl, when she'd still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. Now it felt like a shroud. The village watched the preparations with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Neighbors who'd known Clara since childhood crossed the street to avoid speaking to her, as if her fate might be contagious. Others offered hollow congratulations that fooled nobody. Everyone knew what this marriage meant. Everyone knew she was being sacrificed. On the morning of the wedding, Clara's mother helped her into the dress with shaking hands. "You can still run," her mother whispered. "It's not too late." But it was. It had been too late from the moment her father signed that document. Emma was having a good day. The medicine the Baron had already provided was working, and she sat on Clara's bed watching her sister transform into a bride. "You look like a princess," Emma said softly. "I feel like a ghost. Will you come visit us?" Clara forced a smile, not trusting her voice. She wanted to promise yes, wanted to tell Emma she'd see her every week, but she'd heard the stories about the Baron's previous wives, how they disappeared behind those high walls and never emerged, not even for their own families, how letters went unanswered, visits were denied, until one day the whole sorry business ended with a funeral. Of course, she lied, all the time. The ceremony was set for noon at the village cathedral, a small stone building that had hosted every wedding and funeral in Millbrook for 300 years. Clara rode there in the Baron's carriage, alone except for a stone-faced footman who wouldn't meet her eyes. The cathedral was nearly full when she arrived, not because people wanted to celebrate, but because they wanted to witness, to see the latest victim walk to her doom, to confirm the story they'd tell their children. Remember Clara Whitmore? Remember what happened to her? Baron Crowley waited at the altar, dressed in black despite the wedding, his thin lips curved in that predator's smile. He was handsome in the way a snake was handsome, cold, perfect, and utterly inhuman. As Clara walked down the aisle on her father's shaking arm, the Baron's dark eyes never left her, cataloging her like a piece of property he'd just acquired. The priest, Father Benedict, who'd baptized Clara as an infant, looked ill as he opened his prayer book. His hands trembled as he began the ceremony, his voice barely audible. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here." Clara heard the words as if from a great distance. She felt like she was watching herself from outside her body, seeing this strange girl in her white dress standing beside a monster, about to promise away her freedom, her future, her life. "If any person has cause to object to this union, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The cathedral doors exploded inward. The sound was like a thunderclap, wood slamming against stone with such force that several windows shattered. Every head in the church whipped around to see who had interrupted, and Clara's heart stopped in her chest. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by noon sun, so bright he appeared almost to glow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the deep blue and silver of the royal house, his dark hair slightly disheveled from riding. But it was his presence that struck Clara most, the absolute authority that radiated from him like heat from a forge, the sense that this was someone used to being obeyed without question. "This wedding is illegal," the man said, his voice cutting through the shocked silence like a blade. "And it will not proceed." Baron Crowley's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "And who exactly are you to interrupt?" The man walked down the aisle with long, confident strides, and Clara saw the royal seal on his coat, the ducal coronet embroidered in silver thread. Her breath caught. "Grand Duke Lucien Hale," he said, stopping a few feet from the altar. "Acting on royal authority. This woman is under the protection of my household, and any marriage contracted without my consent is void." The cathedral erupted in whispers. Grand Duke Hale, the most powerful man in the realm after the king himself, a military hero, a political force, a man whose word could make or break fortunes. What was he doing in a backwater village like Millbrook? Clara found her voice shaking and small. I don't understand." The Duke turned to her, and for the first time she saw his face clearly. Strong features, storm-gray eyes that held an intensity she'd never encountered before, a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He looked like someone who'd fought battles and won them, who'd faced down death and walked away. "Your great-grandmother," he said, speaking directly to her now, "was in service to my grandmother." When she married, she was granted certain protections, a royal decree stating that her descendants would fall under ducal protection if ever needed. That decree was never revoked. "I never heard of any decree," Baron Crowley said coldly. "Sounds like a convenient fiction." Duke Hale reached inside his coat and pulled out a rolled parchment heavy with wax seals. "The original document, dated 1765, signed by my grandfather and witnessed by the royal court. Miss Whitmore's lineage is clearly documented. She is, by law, a ward of my household. Any marriage contracted without my approval is invalid." Clara's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to girls like her. Powerful men didn't ride in at the last moment to save village nobodies from disastrous marriages. "This is absurd," the Baron said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Her father gave his consent. The debt is real. The contract is legal. The debt is between you and Marcus Whitmore. It has nothing to do with his daughter." The Duke's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "And if you attempt to collect it through marriage, through what amounts to purchasing a human being, you'll find yourself answering to the crown for human trafficking." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Baron Crowley's mask finally cracked, rage flooding his features. "You can't do this. You have no right. I have every right. Royal decree supersedes private contracts." Duke Hale turned to Father Benedict. "The ceremony is concluded. There will be no marriage today." The priest sagged with visible relief. "Yes, Your Grace." The Duke turned back to Clara, and his expression softened slightly. "Miss Whitmore, please come with me. Your belongings will be sent to my estate." Clara looked at her father, at her mother in the pews, at Emma beside her. They all looked as shocked as she felt. None of this made sense. I can't just leave," she stammered. "My family—" "Your family's debt will be addressed separately. The Baron will be compensated for his losses through proper channels, but you will not be part of that transaction." The Baron stepped forward, his hand shooting out to grab Clara's wrist. "She's mine." The contract— Duke Hale moved faster than Clara would have thought possible, his hand catching the Baron's wrist in an iron grip. "Touch her again," he said softly, "and you'll lose the hand. Try to enforce this sham contract, and you'll lose much more than that." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, the Baron's fury warring with the Duke's absolute certainty. Then the Baron stepped back, jerking his hand away. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Yes," the Duke said simply. "It is." He offered Clara his arm, the gesture strangely courteous given the circumstances. "Miss Whitmore?" Clara took it because she didn't know what else to do, her mind still struggling to process what had just happened. She'd been seconds away from promising herself to a monster, from walking into a nightmare from which she'd likely never emerge. And now she was walking out of the cathedral on the arm of a Grand Duke, leaving behind her family, her village, her old life, and stepping into something completely unknown. As they emerged into the bright afternoon sun, Clara finally found her voice. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you really come?" Duke Hale was quiet for a moment, helping her into his carriage. A vehicle so fine it made the Baron's look like a farmer's cart. When he finally answered, his gray eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because I read about the wedding in a society notice 3 days ago. Because I remembered that old decree and checked the family registries. And because—" He paused. "Because no one should be sold to a monster to pay for someone else's mistakes." The carriage door closed, and the horses started moving, carrying Clara away from the only life she'd ever known, and toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine. She looked back once, seeing the cathedral receding in the distance, seeing the crowd of villagers standing in the square watching her leave, seeing her whole world becoming smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. And she realized, with a mixture of terror and something that might have been hope, her life had just been saved. Now she had to figure out what to do with it. The Duke's estate materialized through the morning mist like something from a fever dream, a sprawling fortress of gray stone and iron that seemed to have grown from the hillside itself. Clara pressed her face to the carriage window, watching as the massive gates swung open to admit them, feeling her stomach twist with a fear that was different from what she'd felt at the cathedral, but no less potent. She'd escaped one cage only to enter another. The journey had taken most of the day and all of the night, Duke Hale riding alongside the carriage on a massive black stallion, stopping only twice to change horses at posting stations where stable hands jumped to attention at the sight of his colors. Clara had tried to sleep but couldn't, her mind churning with questions that had no answers and a future that made no sense. Now, as they rolled through courtyards large enough to hold her entire village, she understood exactly how far she'd fallen out of her depth. "Welcome to Ashmore Hall," the Duke said, as a footman opened the carriage door. He dismounted in one fluid motion, handing the reins to a waiting groom. "It's not as intimidating as it looks." Clara stepped down on shaking legs, staring up at the fortress that loomed above her like a mountain. "You're wrong about that." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps? Come, my housekeeper will show you to your rooms." The woman who appeared was nothing like Clara expected. Mrs. Thorne was tall and whip-thin, with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that seemed to catalog every inadequacy in Clara's appearance within 3 seconds. Her expression suggested she'd found many. "This is the girl." Mrs. Thorne's tone made it clear what she thought of bringing village strays into ducal households. "Miss Clara Whitmore," the Duke corrected, his voice cooling. "She's to be treated as a guest of the household, Mrs. Thorne. See that she has everything she needs." "Of course, Your Grace." The words were correct, but the contempt underneath them was unmistakable. The Duke turned to Clara, his expression unreadable. "Rest today. Tomorrow we'll discuss your situation properly. And Miss Whitmore?" He paused. "You're safe here. Whatever else you're feeling right now, believe that." Then he was gone, striding away across the courtyard with the same absolute confidence he'd shown in the cathedral, leaving Clara alone with the housekeeper's cold appraisal. "Follow me," Mrs. Thorne said, turning on her heel. The room they gave her was larger than the entire ground floor of her family's house. It had windows overlooking the valley, a bed with more pillows than Clara had seen in her entire life, and furniture that probably cost more than her father earned in a decade. A fire crackled in the hearth, warming air that smelled faintly of lavender and beeswax. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. "Dinner is at 8, Mrs." Thorne said from the doorway. "A maid will come to help you dress. Try not to embarrass His Grace at table." The door closed with a decisive click, leaving Clara alone in this impossible room, in this impossible situation. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her borrowed wedding dress pooling around her like a ghost. And for the first time since the Duke had burst into the cathedral, she let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. She'd been saved. But saved for what? The maid who arrived 3 hours later was young, maybe 16, with nervous hands and a thick country accent that reminded Clara painfully of home. "Begging your pardon, miss, but Mrs. Thorne sent me to help you dress for dinner." The girl bobbed an awkward curtsy. "I'm Annie." "Clara." She stood up from where she'd been sitting by the window, watching the sun set over unfamiliar hills. "But I don't have anything to wear for dinner, just this dress." Annie's eyes widened. "Oh no, miss. His Grace sent for clothes. They arrived an hour ago, a whole wardrobe." She hurried to the massive armoire and pulled it open, revealing more dresses than Clara had owned in her entire life. "He said to pick whatever you liked best." Clara stared at the silks and velvets, the array of colors and fabrics, and felt suddenly dizzy. "This is too much. I can't accept—" "Best not to refuse His Grace's gifts, miss. He doesn't offer them lightly." Annie pulled out a deep green dress with silver embroidery. "This would suit you lovely, with your dark hair." Wearing clothes a man had chosen for her felt uncomfortably like being owned, but Clara didn't have much choice unless she wanted to attend dinner in a wedding dress meant for another man entirely. She let Annie help her into the green silk, feeling the fabric slide over her skin like water, so different from the rough homespun she was used to. When Annie finished with her hair, pinning it up in a style Clara had only seen on ladies in the village during festival days, she barely recognized her own reflection. "You look like you belong here now," Annie said shyly. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She didn't belong here. She was a miller's daughter playing dress-up in a duchess's clothes, and everyone in this house could see it. The dining room was a cathedral of its own, all vaulted ceilings and dark wood paneling, with a table long enough to seat 30 people. Tonight, only 2 places were set, one at the head of the table, one to its right. Duke Hale was already there, dressed for dinner in black and silver, reading through a stack of papers with the focused intensity of someone who never truly stopped working. He looked up as Clara entered, and something shifted in his expression. "Miss Whitmore, that dress suits you." He stood, pulling out her chair himself rather than waiting for the footman to do it. "Please sit." The meal that followed was the most uncomfortable hour of Clara's life. Course after course appeared, food she'd never seen before, served with utensils she didn't know how to use. She tried to copy the Duke's movements, feeling clumsy and obvious, certain that every servant watching could see she was a fraud. "You're doing fine," Duke Hale said quietly, after she fumbled with the fish fork for the 3rd time. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted, setting down the fork in defeat. "I don't know why I'm here, what you want from me, or what happens next. I feel like I'm going mad." He was silent for a moment, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. Then he dismissed the servants with a gesture. When they were alone, he leaned back in his chair. "What do you know about the royal decree I mentioned, the one protecting your family?" "Nothing. I'd never heard of it until you walked into that cathedral. Your great-grandmother was Eleanor Whitmore, born Eleanor Ashford. She served as lady's maid to my grandmother for 15 years. When she married your great-grandfather, my grandmother granted her a protection decree, essentially a promise that Eleanor's descendants would have recourse to ducal support if they ever found themselves in danger or in need." "Why would your grandmother do that?" "Because Eleanor saved her life during an assassination attempt when my grandmother was young. The decree was her way of repaying that debt." He paused. "These old agreements aren't enforced often. Most families don't even know they exist, but they're still legally binding. So you're just honoring an old promise?" "In part." He picked up his wine glass, studying the dark red liquid. "But I also have a deep distaste for men like Baron Crowley, men who use wealth and power to purchase human beings and destroy them for entertainment." The bitterness in his voice surprised her. "You know about his previous wives. I know he's a predator who's been allowed to operate unchecked because he's wealthy and well-connected. I know that at least 2 of those deaths weren't accidents. And I know that if you'd married him, you'd have been the 4th corpse in 7 years. His jaw tightened. "So when I saw that wedding notice and realized I had legal grounds to intervene, I did." Clara set down her own glass carefully. "What happens now? The Baron won't just accept this. My father's debt is still real." "The debt will be settled. I've already made arrangements to pay it." "That's 200 crowns. "It's a rounding error in my household accounts." He said it matter-of-factly, without condescension, but the reminder of just how different their worlds were hit Clara like cold water. "Your father will be freed from the obligation, and the Baron will have no further claim on your family." "So I'm free? I can go home?" "You can do whatever you wish, but I'd ask you to consider staying here instead." Clara's breath caught. "Why?" Duke Hale stood, moving to the window that overlooked the darkening grounds. "Because in 3 weeks, Baron Crowley will be at the Winter Gala at the Royal Palace. He'll be spreading poison about this situation, trying to salvage his reputation and destroy mine in the process. He'll paint himself as the wronged party, and me as a duke who abuses his power to steal other men's brides. That's not what happened. Truth matters less than perception in court politics. If I show up alone while rumors swirl about the girl I supposedly kidnapped, it gives his lies credibility." He turned to face her. "But if you're there beside me, clearly willing and unharmed, presenting yourself as a woman under ducal protection rather than a victim, it undercuts his entire narrative." Clara felt her stomach drop. "You want me to go to the royal palace? To a ball?" "I want to give you a choice. You can return to your village, to your family, with the debt cleared and no further obligation to anyone. Or you can stay here for 3 weeks, learn what you need to learn to survive one night at court, and help me destroy the Baron's credibility permanently." His expression was serious, intense. "I won't lie to you. It won't be easy. Court is vicious, and you'll be scrutinized by people who make Crowley look kind. But if you're willing to try, I'll teach you everything you need to know." "And after the gala?" "After the gala, you'll still be free to choose. But at least you'll have a choice. You'll have knowledge, skills, and education in how power actually works. He moved closer. You'll never be helpless again. The offer hung in the air between them, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Clara thought about going home, about slipping back into her old life as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She'd seen what the world could be beyond Millbrook's borders. She'd felt the weight of real power, the possibility of something more. 3 weeks, she said slowly. And then I can leave if I want to? On my honor? Then I'll stay. His smile was brief but genuine. Good. We start tomorrow at dawn. Clara had thought the Duke was exaggerating about the difficulty. She was wrong. She was awakened before sunrise by Annie, who helped her into a simple day dress and brought her to a library that could have held every book in Millbrook 5 times over. Duke Hale was already there, dressed for riding, with stacks of books arranged on a massive oak table. We have 3 weeks to turn you into someone who can survive a night at court, he said without preamble. That means you need to learn history, politics, etiquette, current events, the major noble houses and their allegiances, the art of conversation, and how to read the power dynamics in any room you enter. He gestured to the books. We'll start with reading and writing. How much formal education do you have? Clara felt her face burn. I can read simple text, numbers, but I never went to school. Then we have work to do. He pulled out a chair. Sit. We'll begin with expanding your vocabulary. The lessons were brutal. Duke Hale was a patient teacher but an exacting one, correcting her pronunciation, making her read passages aloud until she got them perfect, drilling her on the names and relationships of noble families until her head spun. They worked straight through breakfast, through lunch, until Clara's eyes burned and her throat was raw from reading aloud. Again, the Duke said, as she stumbled over a particularly dense passage about trade agreements. I can't. My brain is full. You think the Baroness Waverley will go easy on you because your brain is full? You think Lord Pemberton will be kind if you can't follow the conversation? His voice was sharp. Again. Clara wanted to throw the book at his head. Instead, she gritted her teeth and read the passage again, getting it right this time through sheer, stubborn fury. Better, he said, and she hated how much that small praise meant to her. The afternoons were spent with Mrs. Thorne, learning the 1,000 tiny rules that governed proper behavior, how to enter a room, how to curtsy to different ranks of nobility, which fork to use for which course, how to make polite conversation that said nothing while appearing to say everything. Mrs. Thorne was even less forgiving than the Duke. Your posture is appalling, she snapped, rapping Clara's shoulder with her fan. Stand straight, shoulders back. You look like a scullery maid slouching to the kitchens. Maybe because yesterday I was a scullery maid, Clara shot back, then immediately regretted it. Mrs. Thorne's eyes went cold. Yesterday you were nothing. Today His Grace is wasting valuable time and resources trying to make you presentable. The least you can do is show proper gratitude. The words stung more than they should have, because Mrs. Thorne was right, wasn't she? Clara was nothing, a nobody playing at being someone important, wasting everyone's time with her ignorance and incompetence. That night, alone in her beautiful room, Clara cried for the first time since leaving Millbrook. Not from homesickness, though she missed Emma terribly. Not from fear, though she was afraid. But from the sheer overwhelming weight of how much she didn't know, how far she had to climb, how impossible this all seemed. She was still crying when someone knocked softly on her door. Miss Whitmore? Duke Hale's voice concerned. May I come in? She wiped her eyes hastily. I'm fine, just tired. The door opened anyway. He stood in the doorway, still dressed for the evening, looking tired himself. Mrs. Thorne told me what she said. I apologize. She was out of line. She was right, though, wasn't she? Clara's voice came out bitter. I am nothing. I don't belong here. I'm just some village girl you're trying to turn into a lady, and everyone can see it's not working. Do you want to know what I see? He moved into the room, stopping a respectful distance away. I see someone who learned more in one day than most nobles learn in a year. I see someone with enough courage to face down an impossible situation rather than running from it. I see potential that most of the peacocks at court will never have because they've never had to fight for anything. That's just pretty words. It's the truth. You're struggling because this is hard, Clara. It's supposed to be hard. But you're not failing. You're learning. He paused. Do you want to quit? No. Then stop letting Mrs. Thorne's bitterness define you. She resents you because you're everything she's not: young, resilient, and unwilling to accept your assigned place in the world. His expression softened. Keep fighting. I promise it gets easier. When? I'll let you know when we get there. Despite herself, Clara laughed, a small broken sound, but real. Thank you. Get some rest. Tomorrow we work on dancing. If Clara thought the previous days had been difficult, learning to dance nearly broke her. The Duke brought in a dance master from the capital, a thin man named Monsieur Laurent, who spoke in rapid French-accented English and had no patience for mistakes. No, no, no! You move like a cart horse! He clapped his hands sharply. Light, graceful, like floating on air! I've never floated in my life, Clara muttered, trying to follow the complex steps of the quadrille for the 20th time. Then learn! 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Turn! And, mon Dieu, you turned the wrong way! Duke Hale, who was serving as her practice partner, caught her elbow as she stumbled. Left on the third beat, remember? I'm trying! Try harder, Monsieur Laurent snapped. At the gala, you will dance with dukes and princes. You will not embarrass his grace by stomping on their feet like a peasant girl at a harvest festival. Something in Clara snapped. She stopped moving, pulling away from the Duke's steadying hand. You know what? I am a peasant girl from a harvest festival. That's exactly what I am. And no amount of fancy steps is going to change it. The room went silent. Monsieur Laurent looked scandalized. The Duke's expression was unreadable. You're right, Duke Hale said quietly. It won't change where you came from, but it might change where you're going. He dismissed the dance master with a gesture. That's enough for today. When they were alone, he turned to Clara. What's really wrong? I can't do this. I thought I could, but I can't. Every day there's more I don't know, more I mess up, more ways I prove I don't belong. She gestured helplessly at the ballroom around them. This isn't my world. It wasn't mine either, once. Clara stared at him. You're a duke. You were born into this. I was born the fourth son of a minor baron. My path to the duchy came through military service, strategic marriages in my family, and 3 unexpected deaths. His voice went hard. I earned my place here through blood and political warfare, Clara. Nothing was given to me. Everything I have, I fought for. She'd never heard this before, never thought to ask about his history. I didn't know. Most people don't. They see the title and assume it's always been there. He moved to the tall windows overlooking the practice yard. I was 19 when I first attended a royal ball. I'd spent 2 years in the military, sleeping in mud and fighting bandits on the northern border. Then suddenly I was supposed to dance and make polite conversation with people who'd never done a day's work in their lives. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I was terrible at it, absolutely terrible. What changed? I realized it was just another kind of combat, different weapons, different rules, but the same fundamental principle. Understand your opponent, anticipate their moves, and never let them see weakness. He turned back to her. That's what I'm teaching you. Not how to be a lady, but how to fight in the arena where women like you aren't supposed to survive. Clara felt something shift in her understanding. So when we're learning etiquette and politics and dancing, we're learning strategy. How to read a room, how to identify allies and enemies, how to use the system's own rules against the people who think those rules protect them. His smile was sharp. You think I care if you know which fork to use? I care that you understand power, how it's gained, how it's kept, and how it's taken away from men like Baron Crowley. For the first time since arriving at Ashmore Hall, Clara felt something click into place. This wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about becoming a better version of herself, armed with knowledge and skills that men like the Baron never expected village girls to possess. Teach me, she said. Not how to dance pretty, teach me how to fight. Duke Hale's smile widened. Now we're getting somewhere. The lessons changed after that. Instead of mindlessly memorizing etiquette rules, the Duke taught her why those rules existed and how they could be bent or broken strategically. Instead of practicing small talk, they studied the web of alliances and enmities that governed court politics, identifying who owed whom, who had scandals to hide, who was vulnerable to pressure. Baron Crowley's power base is built on 3 pillars, the Duke explained one evening, spreading documents across the library table. His wealth from the southern mines, his marriage connection to the Waverley family, and his friendship with Prince Edward. To destroy him permanently, we need to undermine all 3. Clara leaned forward, studying the complex diagram he'd drawn showing Crowley's connections. How? The mines are running out. That's why he was so desperate to collect your father's debt. The marriage connection is shaky because the Waverleys are distancing themselves after the last wife's death. And Prince Edward, the Duke tapped that name thoughtfully. Prince Edward is weak-willed and easily influenced. If we can make supporting Crowley socially toxic, Edward will drop him without a second thought. And that's what we're doing at the gala? Making him toxic? Exactly. When you appear at my side, healthy and willing, speaking intelligently about your situation, it makes Crowley look like what he is, a predator who tried to purchase a bride and got caught. He met her eyes. But it only works if you can hold your own in that room. If they smell fear or incompetence, they'll tear you apart and hand the pieces to Crowley. Then we'd better make sure I'm ready. The second week was harder than the first. Duke Hale brought in allies to practice with, noble women who fired questions at Clara about politics and current events, testing her knowledge. Lords who engaged her in verbal sparring, trying to trap her in logical contradictions or social missteps. Every evening felt like a trial, every conversation a test she might fail. But slowly, painfully, she improved. She learned to deflect invasive questions with polite non-answers, to identify the power players in any conversation, to use silence as a weapon and careful word choice as armor. She learned that court politics was like chess, and every word she spoke was a move on the board. Better, Duchess Helena Mordaunt said after a particularly brutal practice session. She was one of Duke Hale's closest allies, a woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. You're still too honest sometimes. You wear your thoughts on your face, but you're learning to think before you react. Is that a compliment? Clara asked warily. From me? Yes. Duchess Helena smiled thinly. Most girls in your position would have crumbled by now. You're tougher than you look. But not everyone was impressed by her progress. Lord Ashford, a distant cousin of the Duke's, made his contempt clear during dinner one night. This is absurd, Lucien, he said, not even bothering to lower his voice. Bringing some village girl to court and expecting her to hold her own against people who've trained for this their entire lives? It's going to be a disaster. Clara has learned more in 2 weeks than you've learned in 40 years, the Duke replied coolly. She's learned to parrot what you've taught her. That's not the same as understanding. Ashford turned to Clara with a sneer. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, what do you know about the Treaty of Ashford Downs? It's rather famous in my family. Clara felt her pulse spike. She'd read about the treaty 3 days ago, but the details were complex, and Ashford was clearly setting a trap. She could feel everyone at the table watching, waiting for her to fail. Then she remembered what Duke Hale had taught her. When you don't have all the answers, control the question. I know enough to recognize a test when I see one, Lord Ashford, she said calmly. And I'm curious why you'd waste everyone's time with a pop quiz at dinner instead of simply making your point directly. My point is that you're out of your depth. And mine is that depth is relative. Yes, I've had 2 weeks of education where you've had a lifetime. But I've also survived things you've never had to face. She met his eyes steadily. You were born into power and comfort. I was born into poverty and desperation. We've both learned to navigate our worlds. The question isn't which education is superior, it's who adapts better when the rules change. The silence around the table was absolute. Lord Ashford's face had gone purple. Duke Hale raised his wine glass. Well said, Miss Whitmore. Duchess Helena laughed, a sharp, delighted sound. I like her, Lucien. She's got spine. But Clara saw the fury in Lord Ashford's eyes as he excused himself from the table, and she knew she'd just made an enemy. The Duke saw it, too. That was well played, he said later, when they were alone. But dangerous. Should I have let him humiliate me instead? No, but understand that Ashford has influence, and he'll use it against you now. Every mistake you make at the gala, he'll make sure people notice. He paused. Are you certain you want to go through with this? Clara thought about the Baron, about the cathedral, about every moment in her life when she'd been powerless and afraid. I'm certain. The third week brought a different kind of preparation. The Duke's tailor arrived to create her dress for the gala, a creation of midnight blue silk that made Clara feel like she was wearing starlight. The Duke's jeweler brought pieces for her to choose from, gems that cost more than her village was worth. But the most important preparation was the final strategy session. Crowley will be hunting for weaknesses, Duke Hale explained, spreading out a detailed map of the palace ballroom. He'll try to isolate you, to ask questions designed to make you look foolish or make me look tyrannical. He'll have allies positioned throughout the room, ready to support whatever narrative he's pushing. So what do I do? Stay near me or Duchess Helena. Never be alone with him or his people. If he approaches, be polite but firm. Remember, you're not defending yourself. You're there because you choose to be, under lawful protection, and anyone who suggests otherwise is questioning royal decree. What if he accuses you of kidnapping me? Then you look him in the eye and tell the truth, that he tried to purchase you like property, and I prevented a crime. The Duke's expression hardened. The law is on our side, Clara, so is morality. All we have to do is make sure everyone in that room knows it. The night before they left for the capital, Clara couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, looking out over the estate that had become familiar over 3 weeks of brutal education, and tried to quiet the fear that kept whispering that she wasn't ready, that she'd fail, that she'd prove everyone right about village girls and their place. A knock at her door broke her spiral of anxiety. "Can't sleep either?" Duke Hale asked when she opened it. He was still dressed, looking as tired as she felt. "Terrified," she admitted. "Good. Fear means you understand the stakes." He handed her a small box. "I wanted to give you this before tomorrow." Inside was a pendant, a small silver compass on a delicate chain. Clara lifted it carefully, watching the firelight catch on the polished metal. "It was my mother's," the Duke said quietly. "She wore it to her first court appearance, terrified that she'd embarrass my father. It helped her remember that even when you're lost, you can still find your way." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I can't accept this. It's too valuable. It's a reminder. You've come so far, Clara, from that cathedral to here, from terrified to fierce. Whatever happens tomorrow, you're not that helpless girl anymore." He met her eyes. "You're someone who fights. So go into that ballroom and show them what happens when they underestimate village girls." Clara fastened the compass around her neck, feeling its slight weight settle against her heart. "Thank you for everything." "Thank me by surviving tomorrow." His smile was brief but warm. "Get some rest. We leave at dawn." As she closed the door behind him, Clara touched the compass and felt something settle in her chest. Fear, yes, but also determination. Baron Crowley thought he'd won when her father signed that contract. The court would expect her to be a victim, a pawn, a pretty ornament on the Duke's arm. Tomorrow she'd show them all exactly how wrong they were. The royal palace of Grenwald rose from the heart of the capital like a monument to excess, all white marble and gold leaf, with towers that pierced the winter sky like accusations. Clara's hands trembled as their carriage rolled through gates guarded by soldiers in crimson and gold. But she forced herself to keep breathing, to remember everything she'd learned, to hold onto the compass hidden beneath her dress like a talisman. "You're ready?" Duke Hale said quietly beside her. He was dressed in formal court attire that made him look every inch the military hero turned political power, intimidating and untouchable. "Remember the plan. Stay close. Be polite but firm. Don't let them isolate me." Clara recited the strategy like a prayer. "And if Crowley approaches, let him. We want him to make his move in front of witnesses." His gray eyes met hers. "Trust yourself, Clara. You've earned the right to be here." The ballroom was a vision from a nightmare dressed as a dream. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of silk and jewels, hundreds of nobles swirling in practiced elegance to music that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Clara felt every eye turn toward them as they were announced, felt the weight of curiosity and judgment, and barely concealed contempt. Grand Duke Lucian Hale and Miss Clara Whitmore of Millbrook. The whispers started immediately, a rustle of gossip that spread through the crowd like wildfire. Clara kept her chin up, her hand steady on the Duke's arm, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "They're staring," she murmured. "Let them. They're trying to decide if you're a victim or a threat. Show them which." Duchess Helena materialized from the crowd, resplendent in emerald silk that matched her sharp eyes. "Lucienne, Miss Whitmore." She studied Clara with an appraising look. "That dress is perfection. You'll have half the women here poisonous with envy and half the men forgetting their own names. Is that good or bad?" Clara asked. "Both, which makes it useful." Helena's smile was predatory. "Come, let me introduce you to people who matter." The next hour was a carefully choreographed dance of politics disguised as small talk. Duchess Helena guided Clara through conversations with lords and ladies whose names she'd memorized, whose allegiances she'd studied, whose secrets the Duke had made sure she knew. Each interaction was a test, each question a probe for weakness. "So you're the girl from the interrupted wedding," Lady Pembroke said, her tone dripping false sympathy. "How traumatic that must have been, being taken from the altar like that." "Rescued from it, actually," Clara corrected smoothly. "Baron Crowley attempted to purchase me to settle a debt. Duke Hale prevented an illegal transaction. I'm grateful for his intervention." "How modern of you. Most girls would be distraught at missing their wedding day." "Most girls aren't being sold to men whose previous wives all died under mysterious circumstances." Clara's smile never wavered. "I consider myself fortunate to have avoided becoming the fourth tragedy." Lady Pembroke's expression froze. Beside her, Duchess Helena laughed. "I told you she had spine, Catherine. Perhaps you should save your sympathy for people who actually need it." But not everyone was so easily deflected. Lord Ashford appeared with a cluster of allies, his contempt from the dinner weeks ago clearly undiminished. "Miss Whitmore, how unexpected to see you here." His tone suggested it was more than unexpected. It was inappropriate. "I'm surprised His Grace brought you to such an important event. The Winter Gala isn't really the place for newcomers." "Then perhaps you could explain why half the people here seem to have been born yesterday," Claire replied. "I've met at least 3 lords tonight whose understanding of current trade policy wouldn't fill a thimble." One of Ashford's companions choked on his champagne. The Duke, who'd been watching from a few feet away, moved closer with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Careful, Ashford. Keep insulting my guest and people might think you're threatened by her." "Threatened? By a mill girl playing dress-up?" Ashford's laugh was ugly. "Hardly. I'm simply concerned about the company you're keeping, cousin. It reflects poorly on the family. The family survived 2 centuries of inbreeding and political incompetence. I think it can survive one intelligent woman who speaks her mind." The tension was drawing attention now, other conversations quieting as people turned to watch. Clara felt panic flutter in her chest. This was exactly what they'd wanted to avoid, a public confrontation before they were ready. But the Duke's expression remained calm. Then a voice cut through the growing silence like a blade through silk. "How touching." The Duke defending his latest acquisition. Baron Crowley stood 10 feet away, dressed in black that made his pale skin look corpse-like, his dark eyes fixed on Clara with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face haggard, but the predatory smile was exactly the same. "Baron," Duke Hale's voice went cold, "I didn't realize you'd received an invitation." "Prince Edward extended it personally. We're old friends, you know." Crowley moved closer, ignoring the Duke entirely to focus on Clara. "Miss Whitmore, how lovely you look. Though I confess I preferred you in the wedding dress I commissioned. White suited you better than blue." Clara's throat went dry, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm afraid that dress was returned. I had no use for it." "No? Pity. It cost a fortune." His smile widened. "But then, you've developed expensive taste rather quickly, haven't you? 3 weeks in a ducal household and already wearing jewels worth more than your father earns in a lifetime." "Gifts freely given to a guest are hardly the same as a bride price paid to own another human being," Clara said, keeping her voice steady, even as her pulse raced. "But I understand the distinction might be difficult for you to grasp." Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one spoke to a baron that way, especially not a village girl with no standing. Crowley's expression went flat and dangerous. Careful, girl. You're only here because Hale found some dusty old decree to justify stealing what was mine. But protection can be withdrawn. Decrees can be challenged. He stepped closer, and Clara smelled wine on his breath, saw the barely controlled fury beneath his civil mask. You think you're safe because you're playing lady in his fortress? You're nothing but a temporary amusement. When he's done with you, and he will be done, you'll have nowhere to go but back to Millbrook, and I'll be waiting. That sounds remarkably like a threat, Crowley. Duke Hale's voice could have frozen fire. Would you like to make it official so I can have grounds to call you out? No need for dramatic solution. I'm simply pointing out reality. Crowley's eyes never left Clara. She doesn't belong here. Everyone in this room knows it. You can dress her in silk and teach her which fork to use, but she'll always be exactly what she is. A desperate girl from a desperate family who sold herself to escape poverty. I didn't sell myself, Clara said, and her voice rang clear across the watching crowd. You tried to buy me. There's a difference. One requires consent, which I never gave. What you attempted was human trafficking dressed up as marriage, and the only reason you're not in chains right now is because Duke Hale chose to handle it through legal channels rather than criminal ones. The silence that followed was absolute. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, could see the shock on faces around them, could feel the Duke's tension beside her. She'd just accused a baron of a serious crime in front of half the court. Crowley's face went white with rage. You little... Choose your next words very carefully, Duke Hale said softly. We're in the king's palace, surrounded by witnesses. Threatening or insulting a woman under royal protection is a crime. Royal protection? Crowley laughed, but it sounded brittle. That decree is a joke, a legal technicality from 70 years ago that no one's enforced in decades. It was enforced 3 weeks ago when I prevented you from committing fraud and trafficking. It's being enforced now. The Duke's hand moved to Clara's back, a gesture of support and warning. And it will continue to be enforced for as long as Miss Whitmore requires it. We'll see about that. Crowley looked past them, and his expression shifted to something uglier. Your Grace, how fortuitous. Perhaps you could help settle a dispute about the validity of certain historical decrees. Clara turned and felt her stomach drop. Prince Edward was approaching, flanked by attendants, his round face flushed from wine and dancing. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with the soft features of someone who'd never faced real hardship. Crowley, old friend, and Hale, didn't expect to see you fraternizing with the common folk tonight. Edward's laugh was loud, oblivious to the tension. Who's this lovely creature? Miss Clara Whitmore, Your Grace, the Duke said, his tone formal. I'm here as her escort this evening. Whitmore. Oh, you're the girl from that business at the cathedral, aren't you? Edward's eyes lit with the kind of curiosity people had for amusing scandals. The interrupted wedding caused quite a stir in the society papers. The illegal wedding that was rightfully prevented, Duke Hale corrected. Well, that's a matter of interpretation, isn't it? Crowley said smoothly. I've been explaining to His Grace that certain old decrees might not hold the weight they once did, particularly when they're being used to interfere with legitimate contracts. There was nothing legitimate about that contract, Clara said before she could stop herself. Every eye turned to her. One didn't interrupt princes or argue with barons, not if you were a nobody from nowhere. But she'd already gone this far. Prince Edward blinked at her. You have opinions about contract law, Miss Whitmore? I have opinions about being treated like property, Your Grace. Baron Crowley offered to erase my father's gambling debts in exchange for marrying me, without my knowledge or consent. That's not a contract. That's a transaction in human flesh. Rather dramatic way to put it, Edward said, looking uncomfortable. Is there a less dramatic way to describe being sold? Clara felt the Duke's warning touch on her back, but pushed forward anyway. I understand that contract law is complex, but I didn't think it was so complex that it allowed purchasing people against their will. The girl exaggerates, Crowley said quickly. She was aware of the arrangement. Her father gave full consent. My father gave consent because you'd backed him into a corner with debts he couldn't possibly repay. That's coercion, not agreement. Clara's hands were shaking, but she kept her voice steady. You've done this before, haven't you? Find desperate men, trap them in impossible debt, then take their daughters as payment. 3 wives in 7 years, all dead. That's not coincidence, Baron. That's a pattern. The crowd around them had grown, drawn by the spectacle. Clara saw shock on some faces, calculation on others. This was spiraling out of control, going far beyond the careful strategy they'd planned. But she couldn't stop now. Those are serious accusations, Prince Edward said, his jovial mask slipping. Do you have proof? I have death certificates with questionable causes. I have testimony from servants who fled the Baron's estate. You have nothing but gossip and slander, Crowley snarled, his composure finally cracking. And you're proving exactly what I told His Grace. You're an unstable, ungrateful girl who doesn't appreciate the honor I was offering. You would have been a baroness. Instead, you've chosen to humiliate yourself and everyone associated with you. Better humiliated than dead. Miss Whitmore, Duke Hale said quietly, urgently, perhaps we should— No. Clara pulled away from his steadying hand. 3 weeks ago she would have obeyed, would have let the powerful men handle their politics while she stood silent. But 3 weeks of brutal education had taught her something important. Silence was how girls like her disappeared. I'm tired of people speaking for me, deciding my fate, acting like I'm furniture to be bought and sold and moved around according to their convenience. She turned to Prince Edward directly, aware that she was committing social suicide but unable to stop. Your Grace, you asked if I had proof about the Baron's previous wives. I don't. But I know what I was walking into at that cathedral. I know the stories everyone in the valley whispers. I know that if Duke Hale hadn't intervened, I'd be the 4th wife to die under mysterious circumstances. She paused. And I know that men like Baron Crowley rely on people like you to look the other way because investigating his crimes would be uncomfortable for your friendship. The silence was deafening. Prince Edward's face had gone from flushed to pale, his expression hovering between outrage and uncertainty. Crowley looked ready to strike her. The Duke stood frozen, clearly torn between stopping her and letting her finish. You forget yourself, Edward said finally, his voice cold. You're addressing a prince of the realm. I know exactly who I'm addressing, Your Grace. I'm addressing the man who could investigate these deaths, and doesn't. Who could hold his friend accountable, and won't. Who has the power to protect women like me but chooses not to because it might upset his social circle. Clara's voice was shaking now, but she couldn't stop. I'm a nobody from nowhere, so my words don't matter. But those 3 dead women were somebody's daughters too. They mattered. Enough! Crowley's control snapped completely. He grabbed Clara's wrist, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You've said quite enough, you ungrateful little— Duke Hale moved like lightning, his hand clamping on Crowley's arm with enough force to make the Baron cry out. Release her, now! She's slandering me in front of the entire court, and you're assaulting a woman under royal protection in front of a prince. The Duke's voice was deadly quiet. Which crime do you think the king will find more offensive? For a moment, Clara thought Crowley would actually strike the Duke. Violence crackled in the air between them, decades of rivalry and hatred threatening to explode into open warfare. The crowd had gone silent, everyone watching to see if fists or swords would be drawn in the king's own ballroom. Then a new voice cut through the tension, cool and amused. My, what an entertaining evening this has become. A woman glided through the crowd, and Clara knew immediately that she was looking at someone truly dangerous. The woman was perhaps 40, stunningly beautiful in a black gown that seemed to drink the light, with auburn hair swept up to reveal a face that could have been carved from ice. But it was her eyes that caught Clara, amber gold and calculating, missing nothing. Lady Seraphine, Duke Hale said, and Clara heard something new in his voice. Wariness, maybe even fear. Lucienne, Baron Crowley, Your Grace. Lady Seraphine curtsied to Prince Edward with perfect grace. Forgive me for interrupting such a fascinating discussion, but I couldn't help overhearing Miss Whitmore's accusations. They're quite serious. They're quite baseless, Crowley said, finally releasing Clara's wrist. The ravings of a confused girl. Are they? Lady Seraphine turned her attention to Clara, and it was like being examined by a predator deciding whether you were prey or threat. You claim the Baron has murdered 3 wives. That's either bravery or foolishness, child. Which is it? Clara's mouth had gone dry, but she forced herself to answer. It's truth, my lady, whether people believe it or not. Truth? Lady Seraphine smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes. Such a flexible concept at court. But let's say you're right. Let's say Baron Crowley is exactly the monster you claim. What do you expect to happen now? You think Prince Edward will order an investigation based on the word of a mill girl? I expect nothing, my lady. I'm simply saying what everyone already knows but won't admit. How refreshing. Lady Seraphine turned to Edward. Your Grace, might I suggest we move this conversation somewhere less public? The King's ballroom isn't the appropriate venue for accusations of murder, regardless of their validity. An excellent suggestion, Edward said, looking relieved to have an escape. Hale, Crowley, Miss Whitmore. In the anteroom. Now, the rest of you. He gestured vaguely at the watching crowd. Find something else to discuss. The anteroom was a smaller chamber off the main ballroom, decorated in red velvet and gold. As soon as the doors closed behind them, cutting off the curious eyes of the court, Prince Edward rounded on Clara. What exactly were you trying to accomplish out there? Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? Embarrassing for whom, Your Grace? Duke Hale said before Clara could answer. For you? Or for Baron Crowley, who's been operating with impunity because his crimes are too uncomfortable to investigate? Don't start, Hale. You're the one who brought this girl here, armed her with accusations, and set her loose on my friend. I didn't arm her with anything. The truth isn't a weapon I handed her. It's what she lived through. The truth, Lady Seraphine said, examining her nails with studied disinterest, is that 3 women married Baron Crowley and died within months. The truth is that each death was ruled an accident despite questionable circumstances. The truth is that no one has seriously investigated because the Baron is wealthy, connected, and vindictive. She looked up, her amber eyes sharp. The question is what we do about it. We do nothing, Crowley said flatly, because there's nothing to do. My wives died of natural causes and accidents. Anyone who says otherwise is engaging in slander. Then you won't mind an official investigation, Clara heard herself say. If it's all innocent, an inquiry would clear your name. I don't need to clear my name. It's not tarnished. It will be after tonight, Duke Hale said. Miss Whitmore just accused you of murder in front of 200 witnesses. That can't be ignored. Watch me. Prince Edward was sweating now, clearly out of his depth. This is ridiculous. I'm not ordering an investigation based on hysteria and coincidence. Then you're complicit, Clara said quietly. Edward's head snapped toward her. What did you say? If you refuse to investigate when evidence of crimes is presented, you're complicit in those crimes. You're protecting a murderer because he's your friend. Clara felt like she was standing outside her own body, watching herself commit career suicide with every word. That makes you as guilty as he is. How dare you? She dares because she has nothing to lose, Lady Seraphine interrupted, and there was something like approval in her voice. Unlike the rest of us, who must weigh every word against our political capital, it's quite freeing, I imagine, being inconsequential. She's not inconsequential, Duke Hale said sharply. She's under royal protection. A technicality you've leveraged brilliantly, Lucienne, but we both know that protection only extends as far as the decree is honored, and decrees can be reinterpreted. Lady Seraphine moved closer to Clara, studying her like a fascinating insect. Tell me, child, what do you want from all this? Justice? Revenge? Or are you simply angry at the world and looking for a target? Clara met those amber eyes and saw a test, a question beneath the question. I want women to stop dying because powerful men find them inconvenient. If that requires burning down the system that protects those men, then I'll strike the match. For a long moment, Lady Seraphine just looked at her. Then she laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and delight. Oh, Lucienne, you found something extraordinary. She turned to Prince Edward. Your Grace, I suggest you do order that investigation, not because of anything this girl said, but because Baron Crowley's next bride deserves to know what she's walking into. We can't have another tragic accident, can we? People might start to talk. There won't be another bride, Crowley said, his voice shaking with fury. Because I'm done with this charade. Edward, you know me. You know I'm not capable of what she's suggesting. I know you have a temper and a taste for young, vulnerable women, Edward said slowly, and Clara saw the calculation behind his eyes. He was weighing friendship against political survival, and she could see which way the scale was tipping. Maybe an investigation isn't the worst idea. Just to put the rumors to rest. Crowley's face went from white to red. You're actually considering this? Based on the word of a nobody? Based on the fact that she just made those accusations in front of half the court. If I do nothing, it looks like I'm covering for you. Edward's voice was cold now, self-preservation overriding loyalty. Lady Seraphine is right. An investigation clears your name if you're innocent. And if you're not, he shrugged. Better I find out now than at the next funeral. This is a travesty. Crowley turned to Duke Hale, and his expression was pure hatred. You orchestrated this. You brought that girl here to destroy me. I brought her here to prove she was willing and safe under my protection. The rest was her choice. Her choice? Crowley laughed bitterly. She's a weapon you pointed at me, and now you're pretending you didn't pull the trigger. He moved toward Clara, and she saw murder in his eyes. You stupid, ungrateful little fool. You have no idea what you've just done, no idea what's coming for you. Another threat, Baron? Lady Seraphine's voice was silk over steel. You're not helping your case. Crowley spun toward the door. This isn't over. None of it. He looked back at Clara one final time. You've made an enemy tonight, girl, and unlike His Grace's protection, my memory doesn't have an expiration date. The door slammed behind him, and Clara felt her legs go weak. She'd done it. She'd accused a baron of murder in front of a prince and half the court. She'd forced an investigation. She'd just painted a target on her back that would never come off. Well, Lady Seraphine said into the ringing silence, that was entertaining. Miss Whitmore, you're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Possibly both. What happens now? Clara asked, her voice barely steady. Now? Now the investigation begins, and Baron Crowley spends every waking moment trying to destroy you. Lady Seraphine moved to the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. A word of advice, child. You've started a war tonight. Make sure you're prepared to finish it, because men like Crowley don't forgive and they don't forget. She swept out, leaving Clara alone with Duke Hale and a very uncomfortable-looking Prince Edward. You should go, Edward said to the Duke. Get her out of the palace before Crowley comes back with allies. I'll handle the investigation, but he looked at Clara with something like pity. She's going to need more protection than a 70-year-old decree, Hale. You know that. I know. The Duke's hand found Clara's back, steadying her. Come on, we're leaving. The carriage ride back to Ashmore Hall was silent. Clara sat frozen, replaying every moment of the confrontation, feeling the reality of what she'd done settle over her like a shroud. She'd wanted to prove herself, to show she could survive in their world. Instead, she'd declared war on one of the most powerful men in the realm. I'm sorry, she finally said, her voice small. I know that's not what we planned. I went too far. I let him provoke me, and You were magnificent. Clara looked up sharply. Duke Hale was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, pride and concern, and something else, something deeper. You forced Edward's hand in a way I never could have. You made Crowley's crimes public knowledge. You started the investigation we needed. He paused. But Lady Seraphine was right. You've also made yourself the most dangerous kind of enemy. Crowley won't rest until he's destroyed you. What do I do? You survive, you fight, and you trust that I won't let him touch you. His hand covered hers, warm and steady. But Clara, you need to understand what's coming. This isn't practice anymore. This is real warfare, and Crowley has resources, allies, and decades of experience destroying people who threaten him. Clara looked down at their joined hands, at the compass still hanging around her neck, at the midnight blue dress that had cost more than her family's house. She thought about Emma, about her mother, about the girl she'd been 3 weeks ago who'd stood at that altar waiting to be sacrificed. That girl would have apologized, would have backed down, would have let the powerful men handle everything while she stayed quiet and grateful. But that girl was gone. Let him come, Clara said, meeting the Duke's eyes. I'm not running anymore. The Duke's expression shifted to something fierce, almost predatory. Then we'll be ready for him. But neither of them saw the figure watching from the shadows of the courtyard as their carriage rolled away. A servant in Baron Crowley's livery, taking careful notes of their arrival time, their positions in the carriage, the route they'd taken. The Baron had promised Clara she'd made an enemy tonight. He'd already begun planning her destruction. The first attempt came 3 days after the gala. Clara was walking through Ashmore Hall's gardens with Duchess Helena, discussing strategy for the coming weeks, when an arrow sliced through the air close enough to her face that she felt the wind of its passage. It buried itself in the oak tree behind them with a solid thunk, still vibrating from impact. For a heartbeat, both women stood frozen. Then Helena grabbed Clara's arm and yanked her behind the tree. Down! The Duchess's voice had gone from refined to battlefield sharp in an instant. Guards, to the garden! More arrows followed, 3 in rapid succession, all aimed at where Clara had been standing. The Duke's guards appeared within seconds, flooding the garden with drawn swords. But the shooter was already gone, vanished into the woods beyond the estate walls like smoke. Duke Hale found them minutes later, his face pale with fury as he examined the arrows still embedded in the tree trunk. Crowley, he said, his voice deadly quiet. We don't know that, Clara said, but her hands were shaking. These are hunting arrows from the Southern Fletcher, the same one who supplies Crowley's estate. He turned to his captain of the guard. Double the watch. No one enters or leaves without my personal authorization, and find whoever shot these arrows before they try again. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She paced her room, touching the compass around her neck like a charm, trying to process the fact that someone had just tried to kill her. Not threaten her, not intimidate her, actually kill her. A soft knock made her jump. It's me, Duke Hale's voice came through the door. May I come in? She opened it to find him still dressed for the evening, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. I'm moving you to the East Wing, he said without preamble. Different room, reinforced locks, guards posted outside your door at all times. You're making me a prisoner to keep me safe. I'm keeping you alive. He moved into the room, and Clara saw the fear beneath his anger. He's escalating faster than I anticipated. The investigation hasn't even officially begun, and he's already trying to eliminate you. Maybe I should leave. Go somewhere he can't find me. There's nowhere he can't find you if he wants to badly enough. Running just makes you easier to pick off. The Duke's hands clenched into fists. I should have anticipated this, should have had better security measures in place before taking you to that gala. This isn't your fault. You're under my protection, and someone nearly killed you on my own estate. That's exactly my fault. He met her eyes, and she saw something raw there. I won't let it happen again. But Crowley was just getting started. The next attack was subtler, poison in the wine at dinner. Clara only survived because the Duke's food taster collapsed before she'd taken a sip, convulsing on the floor while physicians rushed to save him. The man lived, but barely, and the message was clear. Crowley could reach her anywhere, anytime. This is insane, Clara said that night, watching as servants removed every piece of food and drink from her room. He's trying to murder me in broad daylight, and no one's stopping him. Prince Edward sent investigators to Crowley's estate this morning, Duke Hale reported, pacing like a caged wolf. They found nothing. His servants are too terrified to talk. His records are immaculate, and he has alibis for both attempts on your life. Of course he does. Clara felt hysteria bubbling up in her chest. So what now? I just wait here like a target until he finds a method that works? Now we change tactics. The Duke stopped pacing, his expression hardening into something Clara recognized from their strategy sessions. We stop defending and start attacking. Crowley thinks you're helpless, thinks your only value was forcing that investigation. Let's prove him wrong. Duchess Helena arrived an hour later with Lady Seraphine, and Clara felt her stomach drop at the sight of the amber-eyed woman who'd witnessed her breakdown at the palace. Miss Whitmore, Lady Seraphine said, settling into a chair with the grace of a cat. You've made quite the impression on Baron Crowley. 2 assassination attempts in 4 days. He must truly despise you. The feeling is mutual, Clara said tightly. Good. Hate is useful. It focuses the mind. Seraphine accepted wine from a servant, examined it for poison with a casualness that suggested she did this regularly, then took a delicate sip. Lucien tells me you want to fight back rather than hide. Admirable, if suicidal. What exactly did you have in mind? I want to finish what I started at the gala, Clara said. Crowley's power comes from three sources: his wealth, his family connections, and his friendship with Prince Edward. The investigation undermines Edward's support, but the other two pillars are still standing. I want to knock them down. Lady Seraphine's eyebrows rose. Ambitious? How do you propose to do that? The Waverley family is distancing themselves already. I saw it at the gala. They're embarrassed by the murder accusations and worried about their own reputations. If we can give them a reason to publicly denounce Crowley, that connection crumbles. And his wealth? Duchess Helena asked. The southern mines are failing. He's been hiding it, but the production numbers don't match his reported income. If we can prove he's been falsifying records to maintain his credit, the merchants will turn on him. Clara pulled out papers she'd been studying, financial reports the Duke had acquired through methods she suspected weren't entirely legal. It's all here, the discrepancies, the lies. We just need to make them public. Duke Hale was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When did you work all this out? Every night since the gala. I couldn't sleep anyway. Clara spread the documents across the table. Crowley thinks I'm just some village girl who got lucky. He's not expecting me to actually fight back with strategy instead of just surviving his attacks. This could work, Lady Seraphine said slowly, studying the papers with new interest. The Waverley angle especially. Lady Margaret Waverley is desperately trying to marry off her daughter to someone respectable. If we can convince her that continued association with Crowley will poison that effort, she'll cut ties so fast it'll make his head spin. I can handle the Waverleys, Duchess Helena said. Margaret and I have history. She owes me several favors. And I can ensure the financial records reach the right people, Lady Seraphine added. The Merchant Guild has been looking for an excuse to call in Crowley's loans. This gives them ammunition. Clara felt something shift in the room, a sense of pieces moving into place, of strategy becoming action. So we're actually doing this? Going after him instead of just defending against him? We're doing this, Duke Hale confirmed. But Clara, this makes you an even bigger target. Once he realizes you're actively working to destroy him, the attacks will escalate. They can't get much worse than arrows and poison. Yes, they can. He could go after your family. Clara's blood went cold. Emma, my mother. I've already sent guards to Millbrook. Your family is under protection. The Duke's voice was gentle. But you need to understand what you're risking. This isn't just your life anymore. Clara thought about Emma's labored breathing, her mother's hollow eyes, her father's broken shame. Thought about the life she'd escaped and the future she was trying to build. Thought about 3 dead women whose names no one remembered because it was easier to look away. I understand, she said, and I'm not stopping. The campaign against Crowley began the next morning. Duchess Helena paid a visit to Lady Margaret Waverley, bringing evidence of Crowley's deteriorating finances and pointed reminders that association with murder suspects was hardly conducive to advantageous marriages. Clara listened from an adjoining room as Helena masterfully played on every fear and ambition Margaret had, turning support into abandonment with surgical precision. My dear Margaret, I say this as a friend. Baron Crowley is becoming a liability. The investigation alone is scandalous enough, but these assassination attempts? The man is unhinged. Do you really want your daughter connected to that? But the betrothal was announced years ago, before 3 wives died mysteriously and a 4th escaped by royal decree. Circumstances change. Contracts can be dissolved. And wouldn't it be better to end things now before his complete collapse takes your family's reputation with it? By the time Helena left, Lady Waverley had promised to publicly withdraw her support and cancel her daughter's informal understanding with the Baron's nephew. One pillar was cracking. Lady Seraphine worked her own dark magic with the Merchant Guild, ensuring that Crowley's falsified financial records found their way to the right desks with the right context. Within 3 days, creditors who'd been happy to extend unlimited credit were suddenly demanding immediate payment. The Baron's cash flow, already strained by failing mines, started to choke. but it was Clara's idea that proved most devastating. His servants won't talk because they're afraid, she said during one of their strategy sessions. But what if we gave them a reason to be more afraid of staying silent? What do you mean? Duke Hale asked. Prince Edward ordered an investigation. That means investigators have the authority to compel testimony. And if servants refuse to cooperate with a royal investigation, they can be charged with obstruction. Clara pulled out the legal text she'd been studying. Right now, Crowley's protection is worth more than the law's threat. But if we make the legal consequences severe enough and offer protection to anyone who testifies, some of them might break. Duke Hale stared at her. You want to flip his own household against him. I want to give them a choice. Stay silent and face criminal charges, or testify truthfully and receive protection and compensation. Clara met his eyes. These are people Crowley has terrorized for years. Some of them saw what happened to his wives. They're not evil. They're scared. If we give them a way out, some will take it. The Duke drafted the proposal himself, working with Prince Edward's investigators to create a formal offer of immunity and protection for any servant willing to testify about conditions at Crowley's estate. The announcement went out 3 days later. The first servant appeared the following morning, a housemaid named Sarah who'd worked for Crowley for 6 years. She was thin and nervous, jumping at every sound, but the story she told was damning. I saw him with Lady Margaret, the second wife, she said, her voice shaking as Clara and the Duke listened with the investigators. She was terrified of him. He'd lock her in her rooms for days if she displeased him. The night she died, I heard her screaming, heard him shouting. The next morning, they said she'd fallen from her horse, but she had bruises around her throat. I saw them. Why didn't you say anything before? The lead investigator asked. Because the last maid who questioned a death ended up drowned in the well. They said it was suicide. Sarah's hands were shaking. The Baron made sure we all heard about it, made sure we knew what happened to people who talked. 3 more servants came forward over the next week, each with similar stories of violence, terror, and suspicious deaths. The evidence was circumstantial. No single piece proved murder, but together they painted a picture of a household ruled by fear and a man capable of anything. Clara sat through every testimony, taking notes, cross-referencing stories, building a case that even Prince Edward couldn't ignore. And with each new revelation, she felt the noose tightening around Crowley's neck. But the Baron wasn't surrendering quietly. The counterattack came at midnight, 6 days after Sarah's testimony. Clara was sleeping, finally, fitfully, when shouting and the sound of shattering glass jolted her awake. She grabbed the knife the Duke had insisted she keep by her bed and ran to her door, only to find it already being kicked open by one of the guards. Miss Whitmore, we need to move you now. The explosion cut him off, a massive boom that shook the entire wing of the manor. Clara stumbled, her ears ringing as smoke began pouring through the hallways. Fire! Someone was screaming. The east wing's on fire! The guard grabbed her arm and hauled her toward the stairs, joining a stream of servants and other guards fleeing the flames. Clara caught glimpses of orange light through windows, heard the roar of fire consuming wood and fabric, felt heat beginning to build around them. They made it outside just as part of the roof collapsed, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. Clara stood in the courtyard in her nightdress, watching a quarter of Ashmore Hall burn, and realized with absolute clarity that Crowley had just tried to murder her along with everyone else in that wing. Where's the Duke? She demanded, grabbing the nearest servant. Where is he? Still inside, miss. He went to make sure everyone got out. Terror flooded through her. Which part of the building? The library? Last I saw? Clara ran before anyone could stop her, back toward the burning manor, ignoring the shouts behind her. The library was on the ground floor of the east wing, directly beneath her old rooms. If the Duke was still in there trying to save books or documents, she found him in the great hall covered in soot, directing guards to evacuate the remaining rooms. Relief and fury warred in her chest. What are you doing? She shouted over the roar of flames. You could have died. Same question to you. He grabbed her shoulders, his gray eyes wild. I told them to get you out, and I came back for you. We're even. She could feel the heat now, see flames licking at the ceiling above them. We need to leave, now. They made it out seconds before the grand staircase collapsed, the ancient wood giving way with a groan like a dying beast. Standing in the courtyard watching centuries of history burn, Clara felt something inside her snap. "This ends," she said, her voice cold and clear. "Tonight, we end him." Duke Hale looked at her, soot-streaked and furious and more beautiful than she'd ever seen him. "How?" "We stopped playing by court rules. We stopped gathering evidence and filing petitions and waiting for Prince Edward to grow a spine." Clara turned to face him fully. "We destroy him the way he's trying to destroy us, completely and publicly. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to the Capitol. I'm going to stand in front of the palace and tell everyone exactly what he is. Every crime, every murdered wife, every terrorized servant. I'm going to make him so toxic that no one will touch him, no matter how much money or influence he has." "That's suicide. He'll have you killed before you finish speaking." "Then you'd better make sure he doesn't." Claire's hands weren't shaking anymore. The fear had burned away, leaving only cold fury. "This is what we prepared for. Not pretty dresses and polite conversation. This, real warfare. And I'm done being the target. Tomorrow, I become the weapon." Duchess Helena appeared out of the smoke, her face grim. "The fire's under control, but the damage is extensive. This was professionally done, Lucien. Multiple ignition points, accelerants, someone who knew exactly how to destroy the wing." "Crowley," Clara said. "He's escalating because we're winning. The servants testifying, the Waverleys withdrawing support, the creditors circling. He's desperate." "Desperate men are dangerous," Helena warned. "So are desperate women." Clara looked at the Duke. "Will you help me, or do I do this alone?" For a long moment, Duke Hale just stared at her, and Clara saw him weighing the risks, calculating the odds, considering all the ways this could end in disaster. Then his expression hardened into something fierce and final. "We do it together," he said, "but not just a speech in the palace square. If we're destroying him, we do it properly." He turned to Helena. "Contact Lady Seraphine. Tell her we need the full court assembled tomorrow at noon, and send word to Prince Edward. Tell him if he wants to prevent a public scandal that makes tonight's fire look like a candle, he'll grant me an audience with the king." "The king?" Clara's heart skipped. "Lucien, you want to destroy Crowley completely? We take this to the top. We force the king himself to acknowledge the crimes and pass judgment." His smile was sharp as a blade. "No more hiding behind friendship or influence. We make him answer to the crown itself." Helena's eyes gleamed. "Eyes. That's brilliant. And absolutely insane. Then it's perfect for us." Clara touched the compass at her throat, feeling its familiar weight. "When do we leave?" "Dawn. Get whatever rest you can." The Duke's hand found hers, squeezed once. "Tomorrow, we end this." The ride to the Capitol took most of the morning. Clara and the Duke in his fastest carriage, guards surrounding them on all sides. Every shadow looked like a potential assassin, every sound made her jump, but they reached the palace without incident. The courtyard was already filling with nobles when they arrived. Word of the dramatic audience with the king had spread like wildfire, and no one wanted to miss the spectacle. Clara saw Crowley arrive in his black carriage, his face a mask of cold fury when he saw her alive and whole. "Miss Whitmore?" he called across the courtyard, his voice carrying. "Still breathing, I see. How disappointing." "That sounded like a confession," Duke Hale said loudly. "Perhaps someone should make note of it." "I confess nothing, but I do wonder how long your protection will last. Decrees can be revoked. Accidents can happen. All it takes is the right pressure in the right place." "Is that another threat?" Clara stepped forward, away from the Duke's protective presence. "How many attempts does it take before you realize I'm not dying quietly?" "You should have." Crowley moved closer, close enough that Clara could see the desperation beneath his rage. "You were supposed to be wife number 4. A transaction. A few months of pretending to be happy, and then a tragic accident. Clean, simple. But you had to run. Had to make noise. Had to turn this into warfare. You made it warfare when you tried to buy me like cattle. I offered you status, safety, a position in society." His voice dropped to something poisonous. "Instead, you've chosen humiliation and death. Because that's what this ends in, girl. You think the king will save you? You think your precious Duke's protection is enough? I've survived scandals that would have destroyed lesser men. I'll survive this. And when I do, your entire family burns with you. That's enough. Duke Hale was beside Clara now, his hand on his sword. Another word and I'll run you through right here. You won't. Not in the king's courtyard, not with witnesses. But Crowley stepped back anyway, his eyes never leaving Clara. We'll finish this inside. Let the king decide who's telling the truth, a baron with decades of loyal service or a lying village girl with delusions of importance. The throne room was packed, every noble who could claim even remote business at court crowding in to witness the spectacle. Clara walked down the center aisle on the duke's arm, feeling hundreds of eyes tracking her, hearing the whispers that followed in her wake. King Roland himself sat on the throne, older than Clara expected, maybe 60, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Prince Edward stood beside him, looking deeply uncomfortable. Grand Duke Hale, the king said, his voice carrying across the room. You've requested an emergency audience to address accusations against Baron Crowley. This is highly irregular. So is attempted murder, Your Majesty. The Duke bowed, Clara following his lead. I bring formal charges against Baron Alistair Crowley for the murders of 3 wives, multiple attempts on Miss Whitmore's life, falsification of financial records, and arson. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Crowley's face went white. Those are serious accusations, the king said. Do you have evidence? We have testimony from 4 servants, financial records showing fraud, and witnesses to 2 assassination attempts and 1 arson attack. The Duke gestured, and Duchess Helena stepped forward with a stack of documents. All compiled for Your Majesty's review. This is fabricated, Crowley burst out. He's orchestrated this entire thing because I tried to marry a girl his household wanted. This is personal vendetta dressed as justice. Is it? The king accepted the documents, began leafing through them. Miss Whitmore, you've been remarkably silent. What do you say to these charges? Clara stepped forward, her heart hammering, but her voice steady. I say they're true, Your Majesty. Every word. Baron Crowley tried to purchase me to settle my father's debt. When Duke Hale prevented that illegal transaction, the Baron has spent the past 2 weeks trying to murder me. Last night, he set fire to Ashmore Hall in an attempt to burn me alive along with dozens of innocent servants. She met the king's eyes. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for justice. For me, for the Baron's previous wives, for everyone he's terrorized into silence. She's lying. Crowley's composure was cracking now. She's a nobody making up stories to destroy a man of standing. Your Majesty, I've served this crown for 30 years. Served it or hidden behind it? Lady Seraphine's voice cut through the chaos. She glided forward, every eye turning to her. Your Majesty, I've compiled a separate report on Baron Crowley's activities. With your permission? The king nodded, and Seraphine produced her own documents, a thick file that made Crowley's face go from white to gray. Financial fraud going back 15 years, coercion of debtors into signing over property and family members, systematic intimidation of servants and witnesses, 3 suspicious deaths that were never properly investigated. Seraphine's amber eyes were cold. The evidence is overwhelming, Your Majesty. Baron Crowley is not a victim of slander. He's a criminal who's operated with impunity because no one dared to challenge him. The silence that followed was absolute. Clara watched the king read through the documents, saw his expression darken with each page, saw the moment he made his decision. Baron Crowley, the king said finally, his voice like iron, you are hereby stripped of your title and lands pending a full criminal investigation. You will be held in custody until trial. He gestured to the guards. Take him. No! Crowley lunged forward, and for a moment Clara thought he would actually attack the king. This is a farce. You can't do this to me. I'm a baron. I have rights. You had rights. You forfeited them when you committed crimes against the crown's subjects. The king's voice was final. Guards. They took him, still screaming threats and protests, dragging him from the throne room as the court watched in stunned silence. Clara felt her legs go weak, felt the Duke's steadying hand on her back, felt 3 weeks of terror and fury and desperate survival finally crash over her. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Miss Whitmore, the king said, and Clara forced herself to focus. You've shown remarkable courage in bringing these crimes to light. The crown is in your debt. Clara curtsied, her mind still reeling. Thank you, Your Majesty. And Grand Duke Hale, the protection decree will be formally reinforced. Miss Whitmore's safety is now a matter of royal priority. The king's expression softened slightly. You've both done the realm a service today. As they left the throne room, Clara felt something break open in her chest, relief so profound it was almost painful. Crowley was finished, disgraced, arrested, stripped of everything that had made him dangerous. She'd won. They'd won. In the courtyard, away from the crowds and watching eyes, Duke Hale pulled her into an embrace that she melted into, finally letting herself shake, finally letting herself feel the full weight of what they'd just accomplished. "It's over," she whispered against his chest. "He can't hurt anyone anymore." "You did that," the Duke said, his voice rough with emotion. "You were extraordinary in there." Clara pulled back to look at him, seeing something in his eyes that made her breath catch, pride and admiration and something deeper, something that had been building between them through 3 weeks of brutal lessons and desperate survival and moments of unexpected connection. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "You could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheek. "Clara, to your grace." A messenger ran across the courtyard, breathless. "News from Millbrook. Miss Whitmore's family, they're asking for her. The sister's taken ill again." Clara's moment of victory shattered. "Emma, I need to go home." "Then we go," the Duke said immediately. "Now." The ride to Millbrook took hours that felt like days, Clara's mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When they finally reached her family's small house, she ran inside without waiting for the Duke, her heart in her throat. Emma was in bed, pale and fragile, but alive. Their mother sat beside her, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of relief, not grief. "Clara!" Emma's voice was weak but real. "You came." "Of course I came." Clara took her sister's hand, felt its warmth, felt her pulse beating steady. "What happened?" "The medicine ran out," her mother explained. "We couldn't afford more, and she got worse so fast. But then guards arrived with Duke Hale's seal and enough medicine for a year. They said it was your doing." Clara looked back to where the Duke stood in the doorway, watching the reunion with quiet satisfaction. "You sent medicine," she said. "I sent protection. The medicine was just practical." He smiled slightly. "You can't save the realm if you're worried about your family." Clara's father appeared from the other room, looking older and more broken than she remembered. "Clara, I'm so sorry. For everything. For what I did to you." She could have hated him, should have hated him. But looking at Emma's fragile smile, at her mother's relieved tears, at this family that had been drowning and was finally learning to breathe again, she couldn't find room for more anger. "We survive," she said simply. "That's what we do." That night, sitting in the Duke's carriage as they prepared to return to Ashmore Hall, Clara watched Millbrook disappear behind them and realized something fundamental had changed. This wasn't her home anymore. It was her past. Important, formative, but no longer defining. "What are you thinking?" Duke Hale asked. "That I don't know where I belong anymore," Clara admitted. "Not here, but not at court either, somewhere in between. Or somewhere entirely new." He was quiet for a moment. "The investigation will take months. Crowley will try every legal maneuver to delay and discredit the charges. You could return to Millbrook, wait it out safely away from court politics." "Is that what you want me to do?" "I want you to choose for yourself. For the first time in your life, you're actually free to choose." Clara looked at him. This complicated, powerful man who'd saved her, trained her, fought beside her, and never once tried to make her into something she wasn't. She thought about going back to Millbrook, to the small, safe life she'd escaped. And she thought about staying, about learning more, about becoming the kind of woman who could stand in throne rooms and demand justice. The choice, she realized, was obvious. "I choose forward," she said, "whatever that looks like." The Duke's smile was brilliant in the darkness. "Then forward it is." The weeks that followed Crowley's arrest moved with the strange, suspended quality of a storm's aftermath. Everything changed, but not yet settled into its new shape. Clara threw herself into the work of rebuilding, both literally and metaphorically. The east wing of Ashmore Hall rose from its ashes under her supervision, and she spent her days learning estate management from Mrs. Thorne, who transformed from contemptuous overseer to grudging mentor. "You're less hopeless than I expected," the housekeeper admitted one afternoon as they reviewed household accounts. "Most ladies of quality wouldn't bother learning the actual numbers." "I'm not a lady of quality," Clara said, though the words felt less certain than they once had. "And I've spent too much of my life not understanding money to stay ignorant now." Duke Hale watched these transformations with something that looked like pride mixed with concern. He'd thrown himself into preparing for Crowley's trial with an intensity that bordered on obsession, gathering evidence and coordinating testimonies, barely sleeping. "You're going to work yourself to death," Clara said one night, finding him in the library at 2 a.m, surrounded by legal texts. "Can't. Too much to do." But he looked up at her with exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Crowley's lawyers are filing motions to dismiss, claiming the servant testimony was coerced. They're going to fight this every step of the way." "Let them fight. We have truth on our side." "Truth isn't always enough in court." He rubbed his eyes. "I keep thinking about all the ways this could still go wrong, all the loopholes he might slip through." Clara moved behind his chair, placed her hands on his shoulders, felt the tension coiled there like wire. "You taught me that warfare is about strategy, not worry. So stop worrying and trust the strategy we built." He laughed quietly. "When did you become the one giving pep talks?" "When you started needing them." The trial was set for 6 weeks after Crowley's arrest, giving both sides time to prepare their cases. Clara spent those weeks doing something she'd never imagined, studying law. Not just reading it, but understanding it, learning how to use legal language as a weapon the way she'd learned to use etiquette as armor. Duke Hale brought in lawyers and legal scholars to tutor her, and Clara absorbed everything like someone dying of thirst. She learned about precedent and jurisdiction, about the difference between criminal and civil law, about how to spot weaknesses in arguments and exploit them. "Why are you teaching me all this?" she asked one day after a particularly brutal session on evidentiary standards. "Because you need to understand the battlefield," Duke Hale said. "And because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I don't want you to ever be powerless again. Knowledge is the best protection I can give you." But it was Lady Seraphine who delivered the most crucial piece of preparation 3 days before the trial began. She arrived at Ashmore Hall unannounced, sweeping into the library where Clara was reviewing testimony transcripts with the casual confidence of someone who belonged everywhere. "Miss Whitmore, still alive, I see. How tedious for Baron Crowley." "Lady Seraphine," Clara set down her papers. "I wasn't expecting you." "The best visits are unexpected." Seraphine settled into a chair, studied Clara with those unsettling amber eyes. "The trial begins in 3 days. Are you ready?" "As ready as I can be." "That's not what I asked." Seraphine leaned forward. "Crowley's defense is going to be vicious. They'll attack your character, your credibility, your motives. They'll paint you as a gold digger who seduced Duke Hale into helping you destroy an innocent man. They'll dig into every mistake you've ever made, every moment of weakness, and use it against you." Clara felt her stomach tighten. "I know." "Do you? Because knowing intellectually and experiencing it are very different things." Seraphine's expression was serious now, all trace of amusement gone. "When they call you a liar in front of the entire court, when they suggest you're a prostitute who traded favors for protection, when they make your family sound like scheming peasants who planned this from the beginning, can you stand there and not break?" "I survived being sold to a monster. I think I can handle some lawyers." "The monster tried to kill you quickly. Lawyers will try to destroy you slowly, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but doubt and shame." Seraphine stood, moved to the window. "I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm trying to prepare you for the fact that this trial is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. Harder than the gala, harder than the assassination attempts, harder than anything." "Then why tell me this now? Why not let me go in confident?" "Because confidence without preparation is just arrogance, and because I think you're strong enough to hear the truth and use it." Seraphine turned back to face her. "You've come so far, Clara. From that terrified girl at the altar to someone who can stand in throne rooms and demand justice, Don't lose that strength now when it matters most. The trial began on a cold morning in early spring, the courthouse packed with nobles and commoners alike, all desperate to witness the downfall of a baron or the vindication of his honor, depending on their allegiances. Clara sat in the front row beside Duke Hale, wearing a simple dress of deep blue, elegant but not ostentatious, respectable but not pretentious. Every choice was strategic, every detail calculated to present her as credible and sympathetic. Baron Crowley entered in chains, looking thinner than she remembered, his eyes hollow but burning with hatred when they landed on her. He'd aged a decade in 6 weeks, the veneer of civility completely stripped away to reveal the monster underneath. The prosecution went first, laying out the case with methodical precision. The servants testified again, their stories even more detailed now that they'd had time to remember without fear. Sarah described finding bruises on Lady Margaret's body. Thomas, the groundskeeper, talked about being ordered to help stage the riding accident. Anne, the cook, spoke about meals refused and screaming matches that ended in ominous silence. Clara watched the jury's faces, saw doubt beginning to crack through presumed innocence. Then it was the defense's turn, and Lady Seraphine's warnings proved prophetic. Miss Whitmore, Crowley's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Pierce, said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "You claim Baron Crowley tried to purchase you, but isn't it true that you voluntarily agreed to the marriage to save your family from poverty?" "I agreed under duress. My father had no way to pay the debt, and Crowley structured it deliberately to leave marriage as the only option." "So you admit you agreed?" "Under coercion, which makes it invalid. Or perhaps you agreed because you saw an opportunity. A chance to marry into nobility, to escape your provincial life?" Pierce's voice was smooth, reasonable. "And then, when you met the wealthier and more powerful Duke Hale, you saw an even better opportunity and manufactured this entire scandal to trade up? That's not what happened, isn't it? You go from a mill girl to a guest in a ducal household in the span of a day. You're given expensive clothes, jewelry, education, all the trappings of nobility. And all it cost was destroying the reputation of the man who'd offered you a legitimate marriage. He didn't offer me a marriage. He tried to buy me like livestock. Or he offered you exactly what you wanted, status and wealth, and you took it, then used Duke Hale's infatuation to destroy a rival." Pierce turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, I submit that Miss Whitmore is not a victim. She's a calculating opportunist who saw a chance to leap from poverty to power and took it, regardless of who she had to destroy in the process." Clara felt the courtroom's atmosphere shift, saw doubt creeping into faces that had been sympathetic moments before. This was exactly what Seraphine had warned her about, the slow, methodical destruction of her credibility. Duke Hale started to stand, to object, but Clara touched his arm. "May I respond?" she asked the judge. The judge looked surprised but nodded. "You may." Clara stood, facing the jury directly. "Mr. Pierce wants you to believe I'm an opportunist who manufactured a scandal for personal gain. So let me ask you something. What exactly have I gained? My family's house in Millbrook? We already had that. Freedom from Baron Crowley? I never wanted to marry him in the first place. Duke Hale's protection? I needed that because the Baron spent weeks trying to murder me." She moved closer to the jury box, meeting their eyes one by one. "Mr. Pierce talks about expensive clothes and jewelry like they're prizes I won. But do you know what they actually are? They're armor. Tools I needed to survive in a world that judges women by their appearance before their words. Duke Hale didn't give me those things as payment. He gave them as weapons so I could fight back against men like Baron Crowley who think women are commodities to be traded." "Miss Whitmore," Pierce interrupted, "you're not qualified to give speeches. Then let me state facts instead. Fact. Baron Crowley's 3 previous wives all died within months of marriage. Fact. Multiple servants have testified to violence and abuse in his household. Fact. He attempted to purchase me to settle a debt, which is illegal under the Trafficking Prevention Act of 1803. Fact. After I escaped that illegal transaction, he tried to kill me at least 4 times. Clara's voice was steady, clear. "Those aren't opinions or opportunism, Mr. Pierce. They're documented reality, and if acknowledging reality makes me calculating, then I'll own that label proudly." She sat down to a silence that felt different from before. Not doubt, but consideration. Duke Hale squeezed her hand under the table. The defense called their own witnesses, nobles who testified to Crowley's good character, merchants who claimed his finances were sound, even a physician who suggested the deaths could all be explained by natural causes. But Clara had learned to read courtrooms the way she'd learned to read ballrooms, and she could see the jury wasn't buying it. The turning point came on the third day when the prosecution called an unexpected witness. The Crown calls Lady Isabel Crowley. The courtroom erupted. Isabel Crowley was the Baron's estranged sister, a woman who hadn't spoken to her brother in 15 years. She walked to the witness stand with her head high, ignoring Crowley's furious glare. "Lady Isabel," the prosecutor began, "you've had no contact with your brother for over a decade. Why come forward now?" "Because I've stayed silent too long." Isabel's voice was quiet but firm. "I told myself it wasn't my business, that the past was past. But when I heard about this trial, about another young woman nearly being destroyed by my brother's cruelty, I realized silence makes me complicit." "What can you tell us about Baron Crowley's character?" "That he's been violent and controlling his entire life. When we were children, he tortured animals. As a young man, he was asked to leave 3 different social clubs for inappropriate behavior toward women. And his first wife, the one before Elizabeth, who no one talks about, she didn't die. She fled to France and lives there still, too terrified to return even after all these years." The silence was absolute. Even Crowley seemed frozen. "There was a first wife before Elizabeth?" the prosecutor asked. "Mary. They were married for 3 months in 1798. One night she appeared at my house, beaten so badly I barely recognized her, begging for help to escape. I gave her money and a carriage, and she fled the country." Isabel's voice broke. "I should have gone to the authorities then, should have stopped him. But I was young and scared, and he was my brother. I told myself it was an isolated incident, that he'd change. And instead, 3 more women died because I stayed silent." "Why are you speaking now?" "Because Miss Whitmore had the courage to do what I should have done decades ago. She stood up to him, exposed him, refused to be another victim buried in silence." Isabel looked directly at Clara. "She's half my age with none of my resources, and she was braver than I've ever been. I won't let that courage go to waste by staying quiet anymore." The prosecution rested shortly after, and the defense seemed to crumble. Pierce tried to discredit Isabel, to suggest family drama and old grudges, but the damage was done. The jury had heard from a noblewoman of impeccable reputation that Crowley's pattern of violence went back decades. The closing arguments were almost anticlimactic. The prosecution summarized the overwhelming evidence: testimony, documents, patterns of behavior spanning years. The defense tried to create reasonable doubt, but sounded increasingly desperate. Clara sat through it all with her hand in Duke Hale's, feeling the weight of 6 weeks of preparation, 6 weeks of survival, 6 weeks of transformation coming to a head in this moment. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. The courtroom exploded with reactions, gasps, applause, shouts of protest from Crowley's remaining supporters. Clara felt her vision blur with tears she'd been holding back for months, felt the Duke pull her into an embrace that she melted into, finally letting herself believe it was real. Crowley was screaming something, being dragged away by guards, his voice lost in the chaos. Clara didn't care what he was saying. He was finished, convicted, destroyed. They'd won. The judge sentenced Crowley to life imprisonment 3 days later in a separate proceeding. Clara didn't attend. She'd seen enough of him to last a lifetime. Instead, she was at Ashmore Hall, helping oversee the final repairs to the East Wing, when Duke Hale found her with news. "It's done," he said. "Life sentence, no possibility of parole. His properties are being seized to compensate his victims' families. Everything he built is gone." Clara set down the fabric samples she'd been reviewing. "How do you feel?" "Like I can finally breathe." He moved closer, took her hands. "How do you feel?" "Like I should feel triumphant, but I'm just tired." She laughed shakily. "Is that terrible? We just won the biggest fight of our lives, and all I want is to sleep for a week." "That's normal. Victory doesn't always feel like what we expect." He paused. "Clara, we need to talk about what happens next." Something in his tone made her heart skip. "What do you mean?" I mean, you're free now. Actually, completely free. Crowley's gone, the trial's over, you have no obligations to stay here or to me. You can go anywhere, do anything. He was choosing his words carefully, and Clara realized with a jolt that he was nervous. What do you want? It was the question she'd been asking herself for weeks, lying awake at night while the manor settled around her. What did she want? Not what her family needed, not what survival required, not what duty demanded. What did Clara Whitmore, 22 years old and suddenly free to choose, actually want? I want to matter, she said slowly, finding the words as she spoke them. I want my life to mean something beyond just surviving. I want to help other women like me who get trapped in situations they can't escape. I want to change the laws that let men like Crowley operate. She met his eyes. I want to stay here. Not as a guest or someone under protection, but as someone who belongs, someone with a purpose. What kind of purpose? Duchess Helena mentioned once that there's no formal advocacy for women in situations like mine. No legal aid, no protection network, no resources except what individual families can scrape together. Clara's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. What if we created one? Used Crowley's seized assets to fund it, made it official and legitimate. A foundation that helps women escape dangerous situations and prosecutes men who traffic or abuse them. Duke Hale stared at her. That would be revolutionary. Good. The system needs revolution. Clara squeezed his hands. You taught me that knowledge is power, that understanding the battlefield is half the victory. Let's give other women that same education. Let's make it so girls like me don't have to get lucky enough to have a duke with a dusty old decree. Let's make protection and justice accessible to everyone. You'd need funding, legal authority, connections at court. I have all of that. Or rather, I have access through you and Helena and even Lady Seraphine. We use Crowley's money and the publicity from his trial to launch something that actually changes things. She could see it now, the whole vision crystallizing. We make the trial mean something beyond just one monster going to prison. We make it the beginning of real reform. Duke Hale was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he smiled. Not the careful political smile she'd seen him use at court, but something genuine and warm and full of something that made her breath catch. You're extraordinary, he said quietly. Do you know that? Most people who survive what you've survived would want to forget it, move on, pretend it never happened. And you want to turn your trauma into revolution. Is that crazy? It's the sanest thing I've heard in years. He reached up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheek. Clara Whitmore, you walked into my life as someone who needed saving, and somehow you've become someone who saves others. I don't know how that happened, but I'm grateful for it every day. Clara's heart was hammering now, awareness crackling between them like lightning about to strike. Lucienne, I'm in love with you, he said, the words simple and devastating. I think I have been since the moment you stood up to Crowley at the gala, maybe even before. I know it's complicated. I know I'm your protector and there's a power imbalance and probably 50 reasons this is a terrible idea. But I don't care anymore. I love you. And I need you to know that before you make any decisions about your future. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the sheer overwhelming rightness of this moment. You love me? Desperately, completely. In a way that probably violates several etiquette rules and would scandalize half the court. His smile was crooked, vulnerable. I'm supposed to wait a proper interval and court you formally and ask permission from your father, but I've watched you nearly die 4 times in the past 2 months, and I don't want to wait anymore. I want to know if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, because if you do... Clara kissed him. It was impulsive and probably inappropriate and definitely not how proper ladies behaved, but she didn't care. She'd spent her entire life being proper and obedient and doing what was expected, and it had nearly gotten her killed. So she kissed the man who'd saved her and trained her and fought beside her, the man who'd taught her that she could be powerful and brave and enough exactly as she was. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Duke Hale laughed, a sound of pure joy. I'll take that as a yes? I love you too, Clara said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. I think I have since you burst into that cathedral looking like a vengeful angel. I just didn't let myself believe you could feel the same way. Why not? Because you're a duke and I'm a mill girl. Because you've traveled the world and I'd never left Millbrook. Because none of that matters, he interrupted gently. Not to me. You could be the daughter of a king or a farmer, and I'd love you exactly the same. It's not your background I fell in love with, Clara. It's you. Your courage, your intelligence, your stubborn refusal to accept the limitations people try to put on you. That's what I love. Clara felt something break open in her chest. The last wall she'd been keeping around her heart, the final protection against hoping for too much. So what happens now? Now, Duke Hale's smile widened. Now I ask you to marry me and hope you say yes. You're serious? Completely. I know it's fast. I know we should probably wait a respectable interval after the trial, but I'm tired of waiting, tired of pretending, tired of being proper when all I want is to spend the rest of my life with you. He took both her hands. Clara Whitmore, will you marry me? Not because of decrees or protection or obligation, but because we choose each other? Clara thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, terrified and powerless, standing at an altar waiting to be sacrificed. Thought about everything she'd survived, everything she'd learned, everything she'd become. Thought about the future stretching ahead of her, full of possibility instead of just survival. Yes, she said, and laughed at the pure joy on his face. Yes, I'll marry you. The wedding took place 3 months later in the gardens of Ashmore Hall, a small affair compared to the spectacle that had almost been her first wedding. No cathedral full of pitying strangers, no borrowed dress, no sense of walking toward doom. Instead, Clara wore a gown of her own choosing, ivory silk with silver embroidery, elegant and simple and entirely hers. Emma was her maid of honor, healthy enough now to stand without coughing, smiling with tears in her eyes. Her mother and father sat in the front row, their relationship still strained but slowly healing. Duke Hale stood at the altar looking at Clara like she was the only person in the world, and when she walked down the garden path to meet him, it felt like flying instead of falling. "You're sure about this?" he murmured as she reached him, loud enough only for her to hear. "I've never been more sure of anything." The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional, but Clara felt the weight of them differently this time. This wasn't a transaction or a sacrifice. This was a choice. Two people deciding to build something together, as equals. When the priest pronounced them married and Duke Hale, Lucian, her husband, kissed her, Clara felt her old life finally, completely slip away. She wasn't the girl sold to a monster anymore. She was Clara Hale, Duchess of Ashmore, and she had work to do. The foundation launched 6 months after the wedding, funded by Crowley's seized assets and supported by a network of nobles and lawyers who'd been moved by Clara's trial testimony. They called it the Whitmore Foundation for Women's Protection, and it offered legal aid, safe houses, and advocacy for women trapped in dangerous situations. Clara ran it with the same fierce determination she'd brought to everything else, working 16-hour days to build a system that would have saved her if it had existed when she needed it. She hired lawyers and investigators, established partnerships with physicians and magistrates, created a network of safe houses across the realm where women could flee and find protection. And slowly, impossibly, it worked. Women started coming forward, not dozens, but hundreds. Wives escaping abusive husbands, daughters sold into unwanted marriages, servants being exploited by their employers. Each case was different, each woman's story unique, but they all shared the same desperate need. Someone to believe them, someone to fight for them, someone to prove they mattered. Clara gave them that. With Lucien's support and resources, with Duchess Helena's political connections, with Lady Seraphine's ruthless efficiency, she built something revolutionary disguised as charity. 1 year after Crowley's conviction, Clara stood in front of Parliament presenting a proposal for legal reform. New laws against human trafficking, stronger protections for women in marriage contracts, mandatory investigations of suspicious deaths. She was 23 years old and terrified, but she'd learned that terror was just another obstacle to push through. "Ladies and gentlemen of Parliament," she said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart, "I stand before you today not as a duchess or a noble lady, but as someone who survived the very system these reforms are designed to fix. I was sold to settle a debt. I nearly became the fourth wife to die under mysterious circumstances. I survived only because of an obscure legal decree that most women don't have access to. She looked across the assembled lawmakers, seeing skepticism and interest in equal measure. But I'm not here to tell my story again. I'm here to tell you about the 347 women who've come to the Whitmore Foundation in the past year. Women from every class, every region, every background. Women who are trapped in situations that the current legal system either can't or won't address. Clara pulled out her evidence, case files, testimonies, statistics compiled over months of work. These reforms aren't radical. They're basic human decency codified into law. They say that women can't be bought and sold, that suspicious deaths must be investigated, that marriage requires genuine consent, not coercion. That's not revolutionary. It's the bare minimum of a civilized society. The debate that followed was heated, but Clara had learned court politics from the best. She'd anticipated every objection, prepared responses to every argument, built coalitions with lawmakers who owed favors to Lucian or Helena or Seraphine. She fought for every vote with the same determination she'd brought to fighting Crowley. The reforms passed by a narrow margin 3 months later. Standing in the parliamentary gallery watching the final vote, Clara felt Lucian's hand find hers and squeeze. "You did it," he murmured. "You actually changed the law." "We did it," she corrected. "All of us." But even as she said it, Clara knew this was just the beginning. Laws on paper meant nothing if they weren't enforced, if women didn't know their rights, if the culture didn't change to support them. There was so much more work to do. She couldn't wait to get started. 5 years after walking away from that cathedral, Clara stood in the gardens of Ashmore Hall watching Emma play with her niece, Lucienne and Clara's daughter, named Eleanor after the great-grandmother whose service had saved Clara's life. The child was 3 years old and fearless, running through the flowers with the kind of wild joy that came from never having known fear or hunger or desperation. "She has your stubbornness," Lucienne said, wrapping his arms around Clara from behind, "and your complete inability to follow directions." Clara leaned back against him, watching their daughter demand that Emma make flower crowns immediately. "Think she'll be ready to take over the foundation in 20 years? "She'll probably start her own revolution by then." Lucian pressed a kiss to her temple. Like mother, like daughter. Clara smiled, touching the compass that still hung around her neck. Worn now, familiar, a reminder of the journey from terrified bride to duchess to revolutionary. She thought about the girl she'd been, standing at that altar thinking her life was over. How wrong she'd been. How impossibly, wonderfully wrong. Her life hadn't ended that day. It had begun. And everything that came after, the fear and fighting, the trial and triumph, the love and purpose and power she'd found, had transformed her from a sacrifice into a force that changed the world. "What are you thinking?" Lucienne asked, reading her expression the way he'd learned to over years of partnership. "That I used to think being saved meant being rescued," Clara said quietly. "But it actually means being given the chance to save yourself, and then using that strength to save others." Very philosophical for a Saturday afternoon. "Blame it on the foundation board meeting yesterday. 3 hours of arguing about budget allocations makes me contemplative." She turned in his arms to face him. "Did I ever thank you properly for bursting into that cathedral and changing everything?" Several thousand times. His smile was soft, intimate. "But I'll never get tired of hearing it." "Good, because I plan to keep saying it." Clara stretched up to kiss him, brief and sweet. "Thank you for seeing more in me than I saw in myself. Thank you for teaching me to fight. Thank you for loving me when I was broken and celebrating me when I became whole." "Clara," Lucian's voice was rough with emotion. "You were never broken. You were always whole. You just didn't know it yet." Eleanor came running over then, demanding that both her parents join the flower crown production immediately, and Clara let herself be pulled into the game, laughing as her daughter ordered them around like tiny royalty. This was her life now. Not the nightmare she'd escaped or the fairy tale people whispered about, but something real and complicated and entirely her own. She was a duchess who still remembered being a mill girl, a revolutionary who attended court balls, a mother raising her daughter to be fearless, a wife who'd chosen partnership over power. She was Clara Hale, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. That evening, after Eleanor was in bed and the house had settled into quiet, Clara sat in the library with Lucien reviewing Foundation reports. A letter arrived by courier, urgent, sealed with wax. "What is it?" Lucien asked, seeing her expression change as she read. "A request from the Merchant Council in Blackwell. There's a case. A young woman being forced into marriage to settle her family's debt. They want the Foundation to intervene." Clara looked up. "It's exactly what happened to me." "Do you want to take it?" Clara thought about the girl in Blackwell, terrified, trapped, watching her future dissolve into nightmare. Thought about how different her own life would have been if there'd been someone to help, some system in place to protect her before she needed saving at the last possible moment. "Yes," she said, already mentally planning the strategy. "I want to take it. I want to make sure she doesn't have to stand at an altar wondering if she's about to die." Lucien smiled, that fierce, proud expression she'd come to love. "Then let's go save her." And as Clara began drafting her response, already building the case in her mind, already planning how to turn this girl's nightmare into her liberation, she realized something profound. She'd stopped being the girl who needed saving. She'd become the woman who did the saving. And that transformation, from victim to victor, from powerless to powerful, from someone sold to a monster to someone who destroyed monsters, that was the real victory. Not the trial or the reforms or the foundation, but the simple revolutionary truth that Clara Whitmore had looked at the system designed to destroy her and decided to burn it down instead. And from those ashes, she'd built an empire of protection, justice, and hope. The girl sold to a monster had become the Duchess who freed them all.